Well, Tom Russ, straight from the beaches of Turks and Caicos to the studio of Speed and Grease. I appreciate you coming.
No problem. Glad to be here.
Yeah. Man, a lot of the focus in my mind when I kind of got going on this was going to be racers, but and it probably always will be, but kind of like we were talking a little earlier, I was like, I need to get someone kind of on the other side that's played a lot of big help and a big role in the success of a lot of racers. So I was glad you had the time to be able to come today, and really appreciate you coming. And when did when did racing really start for you? Where did that start in childhood times, or?
Yeah, so probably a little less traditional than a true racer, right? Where your family, maybe your grandpa or your dad raced. In my case, my dad really had nothing, I want to say, to do with racing.
Okay.
But my family, my dad's side of the family did. So my grandpa owned a racetrack in Rangeline, which is now famous because of the Jeanettes.
Oh, really? Okay.
So where the Jeanettes are from, my grandpa owned a dirt racetrack there in, I think, 1959 through the early 70s. And my uncle Roger raced at obviously that racetrack, but other dirt tracks around the area. And then my uncle Sonny was a promoter for the Central Wisconsin State Fair, for Rangeline, obviously. So,
okay.
But my dad really never got super involved in that. He went off to the service after he got out of high school. So kind of interesting how, I got kind of looped back into it. I'm the youngest of 5 kids. So my parents had 5 kids. My brothers, 3 older brothers, and my sister, no involvement in racing. So
sure.
why I kind of picked up on it. We watched racing on Sundays, NASCAR on Sundays, but it wasn't like something that we were living like you did, right?
You're
at the racetrack every weekend. And so that, I guess that's probably a little bit different than most people. And so that kind of evolved, when I was like less than 10 years old, my dad would take me to the races. We'd go to Marshfield a lot because that's where my dad's side of the family is from. So we'd go to the races in Marshfield a lot. State Park, actually not that much, even though it was close to home. But my parents' neighbor actually drove the tow truck out at State Park. So he knew that I had some interest in racing, and he asked me, do you want to come with me to the races? Well, I thought this was like the coolest thing, that I could go sit in a tow truck when cars would wreck. I would get to go out there. And
that's awesome.
So that's kind of how I guess really started to get involved, and I don't want to say involved, but started going more and more to the point where I probably annoyed my parents' neighbor because he owned his own mechanic shop in Wausau. And when Thursday nights hit, I wouldn't even say Thursday nights. I mean, Thursday hit, I would probably call his shop. I don't even know, but it was probably way more than I realized, like probably every 5 minutes, like, when are you going to be home? When are we going to be home? When are we going to the races? So he would pick me up and we would go out to the races. And true story, I got to the races and Mark Mackesy was my favorite car. I loved his car, and didn't know Mark at all at this point, so just picked him out. I'm like, God, I really like his race car. And, Mark did good at Wausau.
Yeah.
And lo and behold, kind of transitioned, into my, real involvement in racing. So I was pedaling around in my neighborhood. Mark lives about a half a mile from my parents.
Okay, no kidding.
So, I was pedaling my bike around the neighborhood, and I'm like, oh my gosh, here's this guy that, I think is awesome.
Yeah, I've been cheering for him.
Exactly. At State Park. And I always tell people, like a loser, I sat out, I literally stood out at the end of his driveway. Like, when you're that old, I was 12 years old, you're thinking like, this is NASCAR, this is,
right.
You don't know any different, it's just, I thought that was the coolest thing that, this guy that I cheer for, when I'm going with my parents' neighbor, here he is. He doesn't live that far from my parents. So
right.
Just literally stood out at the end of his driveway. Mark a little bit. Mark's super nice guy. Said, hey, come on up here and
come on up the driveway.
Yeah, exactly. So I went and I started just small. Hey, you want to scrub tire marks off my car? And like I said, I just thought this was the coolest thing that I'm getting to work on, this race car. And that was really the start of it, was getting involved with Mark, early on.
Yeah. And that's really when I started going to Golden Sands. That's where I remember you as, hanging around the Mark Mackesy car. And, so I was always curious on how you ended up getting, tied up with Mark. Just kind of assumed, the Wausau thing. Going back a little bit to, the range line, was that, were they, probably by the time you were born, were they all done with that?
Yeah, it was, I think 74, there was a conflict between Neilsville opened and Rangeline ran on Saturday nights. They were running on Saturday nights, and it just became too hard to do 2 racetracks. So my grandpa just said, I'm done. So
okay.
I was born in '86, so that was quite a ways before my time. Didn't get to see that. I've been out there. There's really not much. The pond, and you really can't even tell there's remnants of a racetrack.
Sure. And it was when you were growing up. Was that something did the family talk about the days of running the racetrack a lot, or did they not talk about it a whole lot?
More when I would go to my uncle's. We'd get together on the holidays. We'd go to my uncle's. In his basement, he had all of his trophies when he raced, and my Uncle Sonny had trophies and different things from his time promoting. So it was. It's kind of weird how I went from, really my family, my direct family, not super involved, to me just being kind of hyper focused on racing for quite a bit of my life,
Mm-hmm. And, before you started helping Mark, when you were, that younger age, were you interested in tinkering with things and building things, or, where did that desire to, hey, I kind of want to work on something like this, where did that really fit in with you?
Yeah, I was always very hands-on, still am. I wasn't the couple of my brothers, they would sleep until 11, get up, play video games, all day long. And if it was nice out, I was doing something outside. It didn't matter if it was mowing my neighbors' lawns, tearing stuff apart and then not knowing how to put it back together and making my dad do that. But I was always, tinkering on, and my dad worked on cars. That wasn't his full-time job, but he worked on cars in our shop in our backyard. So I would go out there and, tinker with him on cars. So I guess the passion for, working on cars, even though they weren't race cars, kind of started at an early age where, I was out with my dad a lot.
Okay. Oh, cool. When you were going to State Park and riding in the tow truck and stuff like that, did you ever get out, or do you always stay in the tow truck?
Yeah, I stayed, in because I didn't know.
I suppose you're pretty young.
Exactly.
I don't want you getting out.
I was probably, I was less than 12 because I started helping Mark when I was 12. So, I was probably between 10 and 12. So I didn't want to get in trouble, but it was still cool. And, the racers would jump in, the tow truck a lot of times. So I just, it was kind of a unique
Hey, sorry about your car, man.
Exactly. So it was good. It was fun.
That's cool. And any cool stories that really stick out in your mind from riding in the tow truck? Any guys just mattered in hell when you're hooking it up, or?
Yeah, I remember some bad wrecks. I think Wayne Cottrell, I remember, went off in turn 3 there before they closed that off, and you could actually go down past the scoreboard into the creek there. And I remember he ended up, upside down, back down in there. There were some, bad wrecks, and thankfully, normally if the racers were pretty hot, normally they were walking back to their trailer on their own because they were trying to cool off. But got to see some pretty vicious wrecks, there in my time, going with my parents' neighbors. So yeah, it was cool.
No, it's, man. Yeah. And if you're going to the '90s, I mean, you're going to the heyday.
Exactly.
You were there during the heydays. So that's a lot of good names running around there at that point. That's cool. So, and then as you're helping Mark, where did things kind of go from there? Did you travel with Mark a little bit, or were you just kind of helping in the shop at home during the week?
Yep. I helped Mark, in the shop during the week. Interestingly enough, kind of the phase I'm at in my life, his friends, he had Troy, Scott, Jim, Mike Rocco, those guys all had kids. So they were, Mark had a group of friends that's what they did with Mark. But then they got married, they started having kids, and it slowly started to evolve. And Troy was his crew chief at the time. And, Troy had 3 kids, and it was getting harder and harder for him. So I would say probably 16, 17, Troy really kind of took me under his wing. And, by 18 years old, kind of passed the torch to me to kind of take over. And it was different because there wasn't, we were talking earlier, there wasn't a lot of help. It was Mark and I, and we were in the shop. If we weren't at the racetrack, we were in the shop. And, even at 14, I think 14 at the time, I mean, now you can take kids in the pits, but, at the time it was kind of like 14 was the age where you could have your parents sign a waiver. And
right.
I think back, and I can't believe my parents allowed me to go with them because it was.
You're the 5th child, so they were
exactly.
Ready for
they were whatever go. But it was fun. I remember going down to Golden Sands, and we would stop at Sandy's after the races, and I'm probably 14 years old, and there were times where maybe they had a few adult beverages, and I was driving the hauler home at 14 or 15 years old, driving Mark's hauler with his race car behind it. But, it was, those guys had, I think back and, those guys had a ton of fun, and it was, I didn't know that at the time, you look back at things differently now, but just, really true racers, the go to the racetrack, pour your blood, sweat, and tears in it. And then, when the races are done, we're going to have fun. We were religiously known for being one of the last people to leave the pit area. And then usually we, like I said, stopped at Sandy's. Amy's grandma and grandpa were always at Sandy's. So, that was fun. And then we would go home. And at one point we were sponsored by Campus Pub, so we would go there and maybe we would get back at 1:00 or in the morning, and we'd stop there for a nightcap and then end up home. So I always wondered, I'm like, God, I can't believe my parents, 14, 15 years old, I'd get home at 2 or 3 in the morning, but I'm glad they did let me do it because it was fun.
It's cool. It reminds me of a lot of stories I hear from my dad and uncle. Them, my grandpa would be racing day in and day out, and John Bovey would be. The story I hear a couple times is them getting dropped off as the bus is coming down the road to pick them up. So that's kind of what that reminds me of. But those are all, no one talks about the nights where you went to bed at 9:00, and those are the ones everyone talks about. So that's cool. And so did you ever race anything yourself, a 4-cylinder, a go-kart, or anything like that?
I never. My racing career lasted about 2 races, and it wasn't a really career. We had, when I was helping Wimmers, we had raced in Shakopee, and it was I think it was ASA at the time. Okay. So they had a crew race, where they had like their street stocks or whatever, and they threw all the crew members in it. And it was actually a lot of fun. One race the first race I was horrible. And I got out and I'm like, I can't be this bad. I mean, the thing was so tight. I mean, I hit the throttle and I thought I was going to hit the grandstands. And then the second race I actually ran good. I was leading most of the race, and then I think I ended up second, but I could tell there was something wrong with the differential. It wouldn't lock up. And I remember getting done, and the track official came over because, this is just for fun, but I mean, I want to win. That's fun for me. And I had roasted the left rear tire. I don't know why it wasn't, but it was, going flat. I parked it and I could hear, and the track official came over. He's like, "What are you doing? This thing's broke." It's like, I'm leading. I'm not gonna just stop.
Right.
So that was my career. But no, I never bought any car, never raced any car, never did. Other than that, I mean, I never did they used to have the crew races or whatever. Yeah. I never wanted to get in one because I didn't want to, whether it was Mark, whoever, I didn't want to wreck it and then have to figure out how are we going to fix this thing or how are we going to pay for this thing.
Right. So that was kind of the thing that I was, thinking about. I know a lot of people, obviously, my Uncle Brian or my dad have helped me for a lot of my career, or my grandpa, and it's like, well, those guys have had all that seat time being in a car, so me being able to talk and work with them, and obviously, we'll talk about all the people that you've helped along the way, but that's where, I was always curious, if you ever had any time in a car and how you really started to pick up on, some of that, setup stuff and, really evolve that. When that Troy was passing off the torch for you, how much do you felt like you really, started to understand about race cars at that point? Did you feel like you had like a knack for like, hey, I kind of understand how these things go and what makes them turn and what makes it not turn?
Yep. At the time, I think I thought I really had a good understanding, right?
Sure.
As you
like
go
any
on,
naive kid, exactly.
Yeah. As you go on in your career, you think back and, well, I may have had some success. I probably didn't understand really what I was doing, as much as I did later on in my career. But, Troy was a good teacher. And I think one of the things that I picked up on him, and, as I've gotten older, I look at, a Toby Noodleman or something, keeping it simple. Those guys, Troy was a keep it simple. I look at Toby, they're not trick. They're not going to have a bunch of trick stuff. They just kind of stuck to what they knew. And that's kind of how I've lived my career, is just trying to stick to what I know. So, he kind of gave me the basics of understanding, but you got to keep up with it, and,
right.
And I think that's the biggest thing, is you have to have the passion to want to win, to want to do good. And I think that's what, from an early age, that's what kind of helped springboard me is, Troy was there to teach me, but I'm sure if you would ask him, he would say, I took great interest in what he was teaching.
Sure.
So
right.
It's taking what he taught me and just kind of building on it. And it's hard to back in that time. I'm sure there was differences, but you ran similar things at most racetracks. You ran a pair of 325s, or it wasn't like it is now, where things have gotten so you're on razor thin edge, from being in the ballpark to being out of the ballpark.
Right.
And you're going to this racetrack and you're changing things just to go to this racetrack. I think it was different then. I just don't remember us. There were times you'd go to State Park, it would sit on his open trailer and you'd pull the rear end cover off and you'd, switch from, whatever, 607s to 618s or 626. You didn't change that much.
Right.
You changed gears and you went to the next racetrack, so it was a lot different then. I would say a little more simplistic than it has gotten today.
Certainly. Yeah.
But
when, being around, and I imagine it helps too, being around a guy, Mark at that point had quite a few years of experience, and being able to work with a seasoned race car driver, I imagine helps a little bit as well.
Yeah, absolutely. You take for granted, at time, and like I said, back when you're 16, 17 years old, you don't know any different, but that does help. A driver that kind of knows what they want, and has the knowledge, right? You're not, and like you said, we'll talk about this more later, but, as you evolve in your career, you go from almost being taught to a teacher. You're
Yeah.
kind of switched roles. But yeah, I mean, Mark had a good sense of what he wanted, and he kind of had I don't want to say the bugs worked out of himself, right? He had his driving style. His driving style was established. You kind of knew what you were working for. You didn't go to the racetrack and, he never saw this racetrack and he's learning it for the first time. And so
Right.
you're spending, the whole time just trying to have him get his rhythm down and figure out how to drive the racetrack. I mean, that was done. So,
Right.
in hindsight, huge help to have somebody that was well established and really knew what he was doing.
And when you kind of first really started going to the racetrack and helping as a crew, when these guys are talking about the car's tight, car's loose, when did you really start to pick up on what the heck does that mean?
Yeah, I feel like I still am. If I didn't know something, I did research, and at that time I'm not that old, the internet was available. So
Yeah.
I remember buying books, on race cars and geometry and, just to try to read up and get a better understanding of, what this meant, because I think whether you're 12 years old or you're 40 years old, you have a sense of pride and people don't want to go ask those questions, right? You're like, what does tight mean? So,
Yeah.
My way of handling it was buy some books, go online, read about this, try to get a sense of what, tight is, loose is, so that was really kind of how I developed those skills, is more on my own, because I was probably had too much pride to really truly ask the question, because, I think, boy, are these guys going to think I'm stupid? They wouldn't have.
Yeah.
But that's how people think,
Right. No, I definitely know how that feels. I really just, I looked at, my family as my resources, as my books. And, I never really went and asked a whole lot of other people any other questions. There's times I wish I would have, just to kind of, expanded my resources, just get, more opinions for people. But, I guess I grew up, when I first started going to Golden Sands, I was parked next to Joe Kurkowski, and that was one of the, I look back, that was one of the coolest things ever, because he would get out of his, we'd be in practice or heat race, and he'd jump out of his car and he'd ask me, hey, how's the car doing today? And I'd tell him this, and what are you going to try? What are you going to try? And we would tell him, I'm going to try this. And he'd go do his thing, and I'd go out again, and I'd come back and he'd be like, well, what did that do for you? And he's asking me all these questions. Yeah. And so I, being around guys like that, I started picking up more stuff. But, that's really cool that, that was kind of your thing. I'm going to go buy books and read and kind of figure it out. And was that, what were you kind of reading? Were you really reading on like roll center type of stuff? And
yeah,
okay.
that definitely. So I remember buying a computer software, on Roll Center. I wanted to, even as my career progressed, I've always believed in understanding what you're doing, not saying you get it right every time, but if I'm going to try something, I want to really understand the dynamics behind what I'm doing, not just try it and see what it does, right? Why did it do that? And so, with like roll centers, I wanted to plug some numbers in and see if I change the A-arm or the angle or the shorten it or lengthen it, what did that do to the roll center? And then try to apply that to the racetrack. Okay, if I move it up, if I move it down, then when I went out there, what did it do? Not just willy-nilly going out there and trying things. But it's hard. That's what I think what has kept me in racing so long is that unknown, and that as much as you want to pound your head against the wall sometimes, like, just to try to, it's never, I don't care who you are, if you're Ty Majeski, you're not winning every race, right?
Yeah.
So I think that's what's cool about racing is it's hard, and it's hard. And it's not for everybody, do you want to go be defeated 95% of the time, or maybe even more than that, and just keep going? That's the type of person you have to be. You have to want to keep going. And, interesting that you brought up, like, Joe Kurkowski, those guys. I think when I look back, one of the things that helped is when you're young and, when I first started helping Mark, in the late 90s, very early, I want to say really 2000, he had a really good year over at Marshfield. I think he won like 6 features. But then we hit kind of the 2000s and Mark kind of went into a little bit of a dip. And that's really kind of when I took over as his crew chief. And at that time, when you're not winning races left and right, people are willing to talk. And one thing that I look back on that I did do right was I was all ears, right? And I did ask questions at that time. And, people probably thought this kid, young kid, whatever, he's not going to remember half of this, but I was a sponge, and there was a couple years there where we really struggled and motor failures. I remember one year we changed like 6 motors. I mean, it was just crazy, but people respected Mark. They wanted to see him run good. So they shared a lot of information, and then as we started to get into, 2004, 2005, okay, all of a sudden we started to turn the corner and then people weren't talking to us anymore. So
that's usually the way it goes, right? Yeah,
exactly. So I took advantage of that short window, where we struggled, and learned from a lot of good people, people that wanted to share information and, understanding why they did this and, springs and what, at that time you really didn't have bump stops. So it was a lot easier, you changed springs. Now you look back and it's like, oh God, they had it easy back then because, a couple adjustments, did basic things. Now you have so many tools in your toolbox to try to work with. It just made it that much more complicated.
And when you're asking people questions and trying to figure out everything you could to get out of that dip, did you end up finding, was it a change in technology at that point that you were trying to kind of keep back up with that curve, or, what did you end up kind of finding for yourself?
Yeah, it really was. It was, kind of the transition of, your traditional, small 1 1/8" bar with pair of 325s to all of a sudden, I remember, at Golden Sands, your uncle was, kind of an innovator in that. Ed Holmes, Ed was a big innovator in bump stops. Those guys were ahead of their time. And, I remember watching the attitude of their cars and it's like, they're doing something different, right? Everybody else's, your nose was, 5 inches off the ground and, wheels are cranked and those guys are sucked down to the racetrack. And it's like, what's going on there? So, it was really an evolution. And I would say, probably some of the biggest people that helped on that were when I started helping Wimmers, so I would help Mark full time. And then I started dabble helping Chris. And, they had the resources, that was the biggest thing with Mark is, I don't think people realized, what a shoestring budget that he ran on. It just, there wasn't a lot of money there. It was his parents helping him out with what they could. He got his engines from, BCR. If it wasn't for Boomer, he wouldn't have been able to do it because, I think at the time Boomer was charging him like $150 a race for a super late motor, and like I said earlier, we had some motor failures. Think about that. He was trying to do whatever he could. You weren't going to get, top of the line, but, somebody, S-Wine went down to Wagner and he had, had him refreshing his motor and he had rods that were, had a couple seasons on them. Okay, well, they went in Mark's motors, but he wouldn't have been able to do it. He couldn't afford to go down to Wagner and spend, at that time, I don't even know what, probably 10 or 15,000 or on up. He couldn't afford to do that. That was his budget for the entire year.
Yeah.
It wasn't, how could you spend that on just a motor? So, it made you really, it challenged you. It made you really have to work for it. I said earlier, we were in the shop every night of the week, and I don't think Mark would have had the success he did if it wasn't for that. It just, you have to, at that point, you don't have the money, you don't have the resources to have the latest and greatest of this and, shocks and technology. So you have to figure it out. And, like I said, Wimmers were, as far as bump stops, they were the ones that helped out a lot with that. At the time, Scott was racing for RCR, and, so obviously they were, the cup stuff, was way ahead of, they're always
right.
5 or 10 years ahead of short track racing, so I remember, getting bump stops, and we got these bump stops from Scott, and they were, when I look back, and it was successful. We won the race that when ASA came to town at State Park, and, Mark won that. He beat Brian in that race. He had 2 half-inch puck style bump stops, and they were, they were harder than a rock, and I think now where we've gotten, it wouldn't have worked nowadays. Number one, the racetrack, at State Park has progressively gotten bumpier. Yeah. So I don't think that would have worked, but they were very stiff bump stops, and we had, all we did was string the race car. We put them on some elephant stands. We set them down on the bump stops. And, at that time we were just looking for a height basically off the racetrack.
Yep.
We didn't have load machines. Nobody knew what a load machine was. So, we were setting it up, and I remember the, left front we set up so that the left front was off a half-inch off the racetrack. The right front was off 5/8, off the racetrack. And that's how we set up our bump stops. And it was very successful at that time. So they were a big part of helping us, get kind of on the bump stop phase. But then, everything just kind of took off warp speed. Once the cup cars were on bump stops, and then it became local, then it just opened up to what it is now, where, you have pucks, you have springs, you have, there's every combination.
Different shape bump stops.
Yeah, and air bump stop. It's really endless, where you can go now, which I think has made it even more complicated, because you want to leg up on the next guy. But that was, to answer your question, that was it was a transition, from your traditional setups to bump stop setup. And, a lot of, I would say our early success was due to Wimmers and their help to help, Mark run better.
Right. Yeah. And I think that's probably, the thing I've always admired about a guy like Mark. Because I've never been on a huge budget either. And, people's are less or more. And, if you don't have a huge budget, that is the cool thing about racing is you put in the work, you can get some results too. And it's, and I remember the exact ASA race you're talking about, and, it was a guy coming in on an open trailer, wins the ASA race at State Park in his hometown. And, and that's always awesome to see, fans love it. A lot of people love that. And so I think that's one thing I've always appreciated about racing in general too, is if you're willing to put in the time, you can make some things happen that even guys that are way outspending you aren't making happen.
Yep. Yeah, you have to, at the end of the day, people say it's a dumb piece of metal, and it is. It is. If you can use your brain and really understand what the car's doing, I think you still need a budget, right? I will say that I don't know that we could repeat what we did in the mid 2000s nowadays, because I just don't know that you could get away with that. I think not being able to buy. We would buy, a couple shocks a year. That was our big investment. We bought Penske 7500s. It's like, holy cow. We thought we hit the jackpot. We went from Carreras and not even the adjustable Carreras, the, $100 Carreras. And that's, and a lot of people raced at that time. Those were the shocks that you have to, your Uncle Brian. I remember Mark telling me, he had some of the first Penskes, they were really the ones that were starting to run the Penskes. That was a huge thing, back then to be able to do that. But now, I don't think that, you got to work hard at it. That's not going to go away. But I don't know if we could have had the success that we did, going ahead 20 years, just because I feel like now there's just some things that you just flat out can't go without. Maybe I shouldn't even say that. I mean, look at Toby. I mean, he still runs, AFCOs. They run AFCOs on some of their stuff, and obviously, I think there's more inside the shock than that probably equates to more than $150 shock.
Right.
But regardless, there's probably always a way, but I think it would be more difficult now, and probably more because of the bump stop aspect of it. A spring at the time is really relatively inexpensive compared to, it might seem cheap to buy a $25, piece of rubber for your bump stops, but it's the combination is what's gotten so expensive. I mean, now people have a, whole box full of or more of bump stops, and what combinations do you go with? And you have to, testing, and I mean, it's just gotten more and more,
the margin for error gets tighter and tighter and tighter. Yeah.
Yep.
So yeah, you talk about that, the technology, coming up from NASCAR through the Wimmers. Did you grow up with, Chris or Scott, or how did you kind of get, tied up with those guys? Did they, hey, there's another young guy hanging around the racetrack, we need him along too?
No, actually, with at the time Mark was dating Margot Deachens, and that's her cousins. The Wimmers are. So that is really how I got involved. I didn't get involved because I wasn't involved with Wimmers when they were going all over the country. It was more Chris went down, did his stint in NASCAR, and then he came back, and Chris was pretty much running at that time just the ASA, Midwest Tour. So I got to travel with him, but I had a job, right? I always had a job. I've never done racing as my full-time career. So I couldn't, I don't have that much vacation to go travel 30 races. So that's really how I got involved with Wimmers. I wasn't really at the shop with Wimmers, a little bit, but more or less, we were going to the races. So, Wimmer time was, you were leaving at midnight, 1 o'clock. Wimmers are kind of opposite of everybody. They're up when people are sleeping, and they're sleeping when people are up. So we would always leave, usually very late in the night or early in the morning. So I would help Mark. I would go to the races with Mark, and I don't ever remember. Mark was really my deal. That was my main focus. I mean, if there was a conflict, even though Wimmers were on a much bigger stage, I always went to the races with Mark. I was always helping Mark in the shop. So like I said, really didn't get a lot of time in the shop with Wimmers, just more traveling with them, going to different races. But you learn a lot. Like I said, they had the resources. They could run through. Chris was notorious. You'd go to the racetrack with something, and there was 4 sets of shocks that you had to run through, and you always ended up with what you went to the racetrack with. But you spent most of your practice session running through all this stuff. But that's invaluable experience, that I could take and relay back on Mark's car, because we didn't have that budget. We couldn't go. If we did go testing, we would go testing maybe out at State Park every once in a while. But at the end of the day, you're running on, 150 lap tires. And at that time, we were running on Goodyears. You could do that. They didn't. Now, if you ran on 150 lap, I know people say nowadays, we ran on 150 lap. Nobody does. Nobody runs on 150 lap tires. But, at that time you did. You ran 1 tire a night, and you might even ran your practice. You might have went out and tested on your race tires, because it didn't impound then, so you could. It wasn't that big of a difference like it is now. Now you put on new tires, and it's 3 or 4 tenths of a second.
There was a little more rubber in the tires.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, something like that. Yeah, exactly. It wasn't a sales pitch, right? It was the tire was meant to be raced on, and so yeah, it was good that we had that resource, that we could really almost let them do the testing for us, and then relay a lot of that information back. But Mark and Chris, completely different driving styles.
Okay.
So Mark is smooth. I mean, he's smooth on the throttle. Chris was heavy breaker, harder on the gas, so they both had success. Yeah. It's just really how they ran their cars, and so you can't always relay. And really throughout my career, that's something that I've always tried to stay focused on is what is that driver? The driver that I'm helping, what's their driving style? Thankfully, most of the drivers that I've helped have had similar driving styles. But yeah, Chris was unique. We go over Dixieland 250, you're changing brake pads at the pit stop. Chris was just hard on brakes, you know what I mean? And so, Mark was not a heavy breaker. He would lift early, let it roll, and kind of squeeze the throttle, pretty much no matter where we went. But, probably part of the reason why he was so successful at Wassa, because that, to me, I know everybody has their driving style, but that's, to me, the most successful driving style at that racetrack is you have to be smooth. You go there and, everybody thinks, oh, I'm driving it in harder. And it's always slower. What looked slow would relay to usually a good lap time. It just, especially in a long race, like if you weren't smooth, it was going to be probably a long night for you. You could see the people that would launch out to the lead real quick. And you knew that, I knew at the time, that we were going to be reeling them in, 50 laps into the race because they were going to have their stuff burned up.
Yeah, that was going to be a tough pace to keep all night.
Yep.
Kind of before we talk about, a lot of the other people that you've helped, I know you talked about that ASA race, Mark winning that at State Park. Do you have a favorite memory, whether it's a win or not, of helping Mark?
Yeah. That year in general was very special. I would say that's when State Park, from a super late model standpoint, kind of got, I don't want to say back on the map, but where they started to gain cars again. There was a phase there where, State Park had cars, and then you got into the early 2000s. It kind of trickled down a little bit. The Wimmers took it over, put a little bit more money into the purses, and it kind of revived it. I remember that year, I think they averaged in the mid 20s. It's kind of like Golden Sands. Golden Sands was like the hotbed around here, as far as car count goes. And it, State Park got back up to that, and we were there, we were going to the races, and, it just, the level of confidence that we had back then was, something special in and of itself. I didn't care who was there. I have never been a person to be intimidated, oddly enough. Mark has got to be probably 14, 15 years older than me. But Mark was the one that would be like, if we were in a points battle, like chewing his fingernails, like, oh, we got to finish here. And I've never been like that. Like my mindset has always been focus on our deal. I don't care about the points. If we win the race, everything takes care of itself. And I'm not just saying that, that's really how I lived. I didn't care. Was I aware of the points? Yeah. I'm not going to act like, I never went on the internet to see where you are for points, but I didn't care. I really didn't care. And, Mark was, like I said, Mark was always the one that was, calculating and worried about this. And if we wreck this, and, it's like, let's just go do our deal. But we had such a direct memory. Yeah. The races, but I have never, been able to duplicate this, but Mark and I had a couple years stint there where we would go to the racetrack, and when we would go out and practice, we would not say a word to each other over the radio. And he would go out on the racetrack, he would come in, I would make an adjustment, he would go out again, make another adjustment, and more often than not, we were making our car better. And why I think that was special is because he had that trust in me and I had that trust in him. You asked earlier, you never raced, I don't know where that came from, but when I watch a race car, I feel like I know what it's doing. You know what I mean? Even though I never sat behind the wheel. And, like I said, there were a couple years there that were really special as far as that goes, that we just really clicked. You know what I mean? I knew what he wanted, and, I watched the car, and if it wasn't doing something, I made an adjustment on it to hopefully make it do what we wanted it to do. But I mean, we literally, if people had radios at the time, they probably thought we were changing to a different channel, but that we didn't. I mean, we just didn't, communicate when we were on the racetrack. Yeah, we'd get out of his car, we'd talk about things, but we just had that connection. In that year that he won the ASA race, he won Deachin's, he won the Loda, it was, Mark said that was the first year that he had made money racing. He actually was profitable. I want to say, I can't remember off the top of my head, but I want to say his winnings at the time, and this was, like I said, the mid 2000s was like maybe 2010 or so. He won like over $20,000 in purse. And I think he spent like $15,000 was his tires. I mean, everything. He was all in, was $15,000. I mean, he made money racing. So you don't hear that.
A lot of people hear they're like, 15 grand, that's 3 races.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. So, that was special memories. That the ASA race definitely is at the top. I think Slinger Nationals right there. But how we did it, I guarantee you that there were very few people that even had us on the radar, when we went to that ASA race. I don't think people thought we were going to, Mark was running good, and I'm sure there's people, he'll be competitive, but I don't think there's anybody that thought that we would go out there and we didn't buy practice tires. I don't even think Race Monitor was a thing back then. I don't know, maybe it was, but I remember on the stopwatch, it wasn't like we were blistering speeds, but we knew what we had on for tires. And Mark he knew what he wanted in the car, and he felt, I remember it was hot during the afternoon. We didn't even practice the last session. It's like, we're just going to dial ourselves out. It's going to cool down. It's going to be a completely different racetrack. We knew what to expect. And at that time, a lot of the guys that ran, the Steve Carlson, those guys, it had been years, since they had seen that racetrack. So from that aspect, I feel like we had a leg up on them because we knew, like going to lacrosse, Steve Carlson probably knows what's going to happen when the sun goes down and when it cools off, right, and what the track is going to do. That's what we did. We knew what was going to happen. So we were set up, for the long haul. So we didn't, like I said, we didn't buy practice tires. We didn't even practice the last session. We were probably mid-pack on speeds, but we felt confident at that point that, we had a good car, good piece underneath us.
Yeah, and you're right. Really that time, because I think I came into super late model racing 2010, and the Wimmers were picking up State Park Speedway at that point, and that track really picked up at that point, and because really when I was running at Golden Sands or Marshall and a Super Stock or something like that, no one people didn't talk about, hey, we're gonna go to State Park Speedway, and really once they came along, that was a place to be. It was, the Larry Deachin's Memorial and, the ASA was coming back there. It was, so when he was running good there, he was beating a lot of me because Tim Sauter was running around that time, probably on a weekly basis, yes, I'd imagine.
Yep. Eswine was running up there weekly, and he was the king down here. He was the one that was every year, he was up there winning the track championship, hard to beat. It was, you were beating a lot of top guys and a lot of top guys that we knew that had budgets much bigger than us, but that never deterred us, and we went to the racetrack, and I didn't care about anybody else. I didn't care who showed up to the racetrack. I didn't care if the Wimmers showed up to the racetrack, right? We knew that if we did our job, that we could compete with anybody there. And I think that was one thing that was cool about State Park in general. That track lend itself to a small budget racer. You go to Kaukauna, you're not going to go to Kaukauna 50 horsepower down, right?
No.
You're done. You're done. State Park, okay, bring your,
50 horse down, you're looking good.
Exactly. So I think that, really helped Mark in the success of his career. Is just, his home racetrack. It fit his budget, that low budget. It wasn't as impactful there as it was maybe other places, a Madison or a Kaukauna, where you better not be renting a motor for $150 a night. You're probably not going to be able to compete down the straightaways, but it's no matter what, I don't care what racetrack you go to though. Handling is king, right? You still have to get through the corners. And that's where we were strong, and Mark was really strong for a number of years there on the outside, and everybody wanted to bunker to the bottom. And, we would just, go around everybody on the outside. It was like, what are you guys doing? And we just, we didn't intentionally, it wasn't like we were out there during practice running the outside lane, right? Nobody does that.
No.
It just, I don't know. It just, we were strong out there, and I remember that ASA race, Jeff Storm came up and he's like, if I drove my car in that hard into turn 3, I'd end up in that pond, because he could. Mark could just really drive it in there, but it wasn't just driving it in there. It was, he wasn't driving in there and hammering on the brakes. He could just, it was turning. The front end was really working, where he could drive it in there and he could roll. And then, it makes you look like you have 50 more horsepower, because it's like, what are you doing? But you're just rolling through the corner so much faster than
getting in the throttle quicker.
Exactly. It's just, everything's clicking, So, not every racetrack. Even like lacrosse. I remember we went over there maybe 10 years ago with a 5.3. And at that time, it was the race that Ricky Brooks came up here, his one and done up north. But he only wanted a 2-barrel to run on it, and I think people thought, I was there with Luke, and I think people thought there's no way. I think he qualified like 6th, and he ran up front. He actually led a bunch of it, and the distributor came apart on it. But, Ty had told Luke at the time, he said, just get your car to turn. You will look like, and it did. I remember Bubba Pollard was up that year, and we went down the straightaway neck and neck with him with a 5.3. We were probably 40 horse down easy compared to what he had, in his car, but we were turning good.
Yeah, it's a big momentum track.
Yeah, but Kaukauna and Madison are a lot different. I don't care how good you're turning. You're still, you're coming to more, like Madison, you're using brake there,
Right.
Kaukauna turn 1, you're using brake there. I don't care how good it turns. You still need power to get up out of the hole at those racetracks. So, but yeah, it's just, State Park was a good fit for Mark. Not only budget wise, but driving style wise, it everything kind of clicked.
Yeah. The one thing I had never really thought of until you said it, and I think about the mindset that I've had to have at different moments in my racing career, at different races, but there's kind of the mindset too of the crew members, and you talking about not worrying about who's showing up, not worrying about the points. As a crew member, as a crew chief, that's about the optimal mindset to really be able to truly have.
Yep.
And I imagine you've probably felt that play it into a huge part of your success, just being able to go to the racetrack and just kind of worry about, like you said, we just got to do what we know what we got to do.
Yes, it got harder as to do that. Not for me. It got harder once I went from really, like I talked about with Mark, like Mark and Troy teaching me, to now all of a sudden you take on younger racers. And now you got dads involved, right? And now you got Race Monitor, and they're staring at that, what's going on, and they are worried about everybody else. So it got harder, and as I matured and became more confident, in my abilities, it got to a point where you have to say enough. You know what I mean? I don't care what anybody, you're paying me to do a job. You know what I mean? We're focused on our own stuff, but I get it. I'm a dad now too. And you want the best for your kids, right?
Yeah.
And so you become hyper focused, but at the time it's like, oh my gosh, just, I don't care what, somebody else is doing. And it becomes so hard, and I talked about like just understanding what the race car is doing. That was my philosophy throughout my career, is really me knowing what I was doing, not just, hey, Toby Noodleman is kicking everybody's butt with Steve Carlson or Ty Majeski. Like, oh, he has his third link at, 30 degrees. Great. That's one thing out of 100 things that he's doing. Yeah. And so many people, and I'm not blaming any fault, so many people do that nowadays, right? They hear something, they see something, but it's not the package, which is why I just totally strayed away from that, because I don't know what they're doing. I don't know their geometry. I don't know their roll center. I don't know where their track bar is, their wedge, their springs. There's so much that goes on. And it's like, if I put my third link angle at 30 degrees, the car will probably end up in the billboards because it'll shove so bad coming off the corner. There's something else that is going on besides just that. So I don't know, like I said, I don't know why I have been able to really stay true to that philosophy. And I remember one race in Madison where I did not stay true. We went down there. This was actually with Luke. We went down there, and this is when he was running the Cars Tour down there, and they brought their crew chief from down south up here. And we were okay, probably top 10 on the speed charts or whatever. And one of Luke's big sponsors was like, of course we want to be first on the chart. So, well, what do you think, Josh? What do you think, Josh? And we ended up going down the wrong road, right? In fairness, he was put on the spot. And after that race, we did not run good that race. And we had stuff in there that I had never run in my career. And after that race, I said, never again, not happening. You're not bringing somebody up here. I'm not going someplace. It's not fair to anybody. And all it did was, he had a whole different setup. I had a whole different setup, and you're trying to mesh things together. It doesn't work, and it was the worst we ever ran there, and it's like, I'm not doing that. So it is hard to do, sometimes, especially when, when I was helping Mark, right, we didn't feel that pressure, right? You're not helping people. You're not helping people that, maybe want to go places. You're helping a racer that Mark wasn't looking to go race NASCAR, right? He just wanted to go out, have fun after the races, have a beer with, his buddies. And that was what we did, so a lot less pressure, definitely when I was helping Mark, but just kind of an interesting dynamic of really staying true to what and I tell people all the time, people reach out to me and, what should I do here? And, I try to be brutally honest with people, and I'll help people, try to lead them in a direction. I'm not going to lie to them. Why? Because at the end of the day, call it confidence, call it cockiness. I feel like I can beat them when I go to the racetrack, right? I'm not worried about somebody else, right? I feel like I can help them. But the biggest piece of advice I give people is like, I could tell you what we ran for a right front bump stop here, but that's one piece.
Right.
Like, unless I came and I started with your race car from scratch and we went out and tested, I'm not going to waste your money. I'm not going to even let you pay me. I had people offer to pay me. Hey, I'm not going to do that because I don't want to put my reputation on, and I don't want to even say reputation. I know people do this for a living, right? I didn't do it for a living,
right?
So I didn't need that income to say, hey, Colin, you called me up and you offered me $1,000 to give you the setup, and then you go run like crap, and you're like, what did this guy give me? I didn't want to do that, right? I didn't want to just go help 100 people. That was never my thing. I had, people that I helped throughout their careers, but I helped them for a number of years. It wasn't, go here and then help somebody else the next year because they gave me, $500 more than the next guy. It wasn't like that. I felt like, you look at a Toby Noodleman, right? You don't think that guy's phone is ringing off the hook, but Toby wants to win races. And so why do you think Toby stayed with a Steve Holzhausen, a Steve Carlson, and I know he dabbled a little bit, a Ty Majeski, right? Those guys in combination with each other were great at what they did.
Mm-hmm.
You took a great driver, a great crew chief, you pair them together, and you got great results, right?
Right.
You take a great crew chief and you put them with a so-so driver, you're not going to have the success. I don't care. Everybody thinks that, I shouldn't say everybody, a lot of people think, that you can just hire Toby Noodleman and you're going to go win all these races. And Toby knows that. Toby's not going to say that, right? But he knows that. He knows that you can't just hire him and you take an average driver and all of a sudden you're going to go light the world on fire, especially on a stage, with, ASA racing or the ARCA races. Like when you go, like you look at what he did with Steve Carlson, Steve Holzhausen, Ty Majeski, they weren't putzing around at, La Crosse Fairground Speedway and dominating races. They were going anywhere in the country and they were dominating races, right?
For years.
Exactly. That's what's hard to do. Like people can go to their home racetrack and they run here, and that is, well, it's not easy. Nothing in racing is easy, but it's much easier to load your car up in the hauler, go out to State Park Speedway, unload it after Thursday night, and load it up the next Thursday night and go back out to State Park Speedway. I could probably be really, really good if that's what the focus was, but it's much harder when you're loading up Thursday night and then you're going down to Golden Sands Friday and then you're running a tour race down in Madison and then you're going to Kaukauna. That's difficult to do. You're going to Slinger on Sunday. That's really hard to be successful and do that. And that's what those guys have done. They've gone to any racetrack in the country and they're going to be there. They're going to be competitive. So cool to see. I have a lot of respect for Toby. I think if not the greatest, he's got to be in the top three. You think about, how his demeanor, right? I mean, he's just, for lack of better terms, I mean, he's dressed like a slob, right? I mean, he's that's Toby. You know what I mean? He's, I know when he helped the Deckers, I remember Alan telling me they went to Wassa, they ran like crap and took it back over to Mark Krause's shop. And he said he literally asked for the, torch and just hacked the whole cross member off right in the shop. I mean, didn't measure anything, just, done. I mean, that's Toby, and I've seen it. I mean, I've seen it at Slinger, where they've struggled and, he's cutting shock mounts off right at the racetrack. I mean, like, who does this, right? I mean, there's very few people there's probably nobody that can do that. And I think that's what pisses people off so much is they see like, we're sitting there, you're trying to get your bump steer within, to the nth degree. And then you see somebody out there with a Sawzall, cutting a shock mount off and just holding it up there and welding it back on. And it's like, and then they go out there and win. And it's like, what the hell? I'm meticulous. I got everything down to the, 1/8 inch, 1/16 of an inch. And this guy's just willy nilly just doing stuff. And I think that's cool. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It shows it shows people you don't need that latest, greatest, that, top of the line this. Like, he gets it, right? He gets it, and I'm guessing he sticks to what he knows, right? He's not, they test.
Keeping it simple, exactly. Like you've been talking about.
Yep, exactly. Keep it simple.
Yeah, and I think it's, when you talk about, people calling up and like, hey, can I, get this set up kind of a thing, or, looking at what someone else is doing, and hey, I gotta, put that at whatever angle too. And, but then, and then you think about, when you're helping Mark, you got a driver who's not heavy on brake, he's smooth, and then you're helping Chris, he's harder on brakes. That same stuff doesn't work for the same people. Some of it might, but not all of it. So it, when people are looking around, well, it's, hey, there's more under that package than what appears to the eye. And how does that driver drive in comparison to you? Because it's probably not going to work too, or may not work as well as you want it to, anyways. But
it's the number one thing if you want to really piss a race car driver off is compare them to another race car driver. And I've been guilty of it. Probably my brother-in-law, when I helped him, probably harder on him than probably anybody that I worked with, and he would probably tell you the same. But, I know there were times where it's like you get so frustrated. It's like, you're comparing him to Luke or Mark or whatever, and, it wasn't the right thing to do, by the way. But it just, it irritates them, right? Yeah. It's like, well, I'm not them. And that's true, right? They're not this driver. They're not that driver. So at the end of the day, it really doesn't matter. Even, throughout my career, you've talked about, do we throw somebody else in the car? But why? What good is it if I throw somebody else in the car other than making one of us look bad, right? Either they jump in the car and they go 0.3 faster, or they jump in the car and they go the same speed or slower. Either way, somebody's going to have hurt feelings out of the deal, right? So, I never, while at times, like I said, you get frustrated and you think, I want to do this. I've never done that because nobody's going to win, if they're racing the car, you got to figure out how to, make it work for them.
Right. Making stuff work for people. And then, you're talking about your brother-in-law, Jerry Brickner, right? Yeah. Yep. So, and I know you helped him for a little while. Then after the helping Mark and helping with Chris, who was the next person you kind of ended up, helping out?
So when I was helping Mark, Natalie Decker she was in Super Stocks, and they had bought a limited late at the time.
Okay.
And, Chuck had approached me about helping them, and I thought, let's give it a try. At that time I was younger and, had a little money thrown in front of me, and it's like, hey, I can make money doing this, so it was, I'm not going to lie, at the time, that was probably the biggest motivator, right?
Yeah.
Is, hey, I can make money doing this instead of, when I was helping Mark, I genuinely wanted him to run good. And, it wasn't like I was making a lot of money. I would stick my own money in Mark's race car. I would help him. I'd buy headers. I'd buy a shock. I'd buy, that's how Mark operated. So this was a lot different scenario for me. It's like, I'm not spending any money, and, I have a chance to help a young up and coming driver. So, the plan was that Natalie was going to go, race limited lates. And so I was going to continue to help Mark, and I did, while she ran limited lates. So I think that went on for about a year. And then we went to Speed Weeks with Natalie in a super late, and she was still going to run her limited back home. And so we went to the races once, and I was crew chiefing Mark's super late, Natalie's limited late, and she brought her super late that night. So 2 super lates and a limited late. And that was the night I knew I couldn't do it anymore. I couldn't help Mark anymore. And that was hard. It was hard because, we had a special thing, and it was probably harder on Mark. You know what I mean? It really was. For me at the time, I was looking at the next best thing, right? Mark, didn't want the next best thing. He was happy with, what he had. So it was, I think, tough time. And one thing I think that says a lot about who Mark is, there was a lot of stuff going around, right? And even people close to Mark, I'm sure I wasn't their number one fan at the time, but he always stayed true to me. He never, you never heard through the grapevine, Mark said this about you, and I think that really said, and him and I still communicate all the time, and we still talk all the time. We'll throw ideas off of each other. But it was hard, because, Mark was really running good, at the time. And, I think as, a couple of years passed and performance started to drop off, I'm sure it was tough for Mark. And truth be told, it was tough for me. You don't stop. You spend 15 years, with somebody. I spent more time with him than anybody. It's just more time than your family. He means a lot to me, so,
you went from, watching him while you're in a tow truck to standing at the end of his driveway to helping him and winning with him.
Yeah. It's hard to see somebody struggle, right? So that was hard for me. But, I think if you ask Mark now, I think he's probably happy for me. I hope he's happy for me, and the way everything turned out. I'm sure selfishly, he wishes I would have helped him till, just recently too. But, I don't regret it. You know what I mean? I don't regret it. But that doesn't mean it wasn't hard for me to see some of the years where Mark really struggled. And, I wanted to help him, but it goes back to what I said earlier. It just, you don't just text somebody a setup, and with Mark, I am more open with him. I'm an open book with him. Even to this day, I'm going to tell him more than I tell anybody, and it doesn't work though. It just doesn't work. And, short of me going back and just physically being there and starting from scratch, which is a lot of effort, it just, that's time has passed and, life goes on. And, so, I realized that race that I can't do this, that I'm going to go, full time and help Deckers. So, we kind of a funny story, I won't get into details, but, Chuck called me and said, Natalie's race car is at the Quick Trip in Mosinee. It's like, what? So this is the start of me helping him. So, the people that used to help him, I don't know what happened, whatever, none of my business, but they brought it up to the Quick Trip in Mosinee, the hauler, the car, everything, parked it at the Quick Trip. And so I got a ride down to there and took it back. And at that time I had just bought a house. I had a small, 1.5 car garage. And that's where I was working at her, with her limited late.
Okay.
Her super late was stored up by Wimmers.
Okay.
So they, that's kind of, I would say, as far as working in the shop with Wimmers, that's where, Chris and I worked a lot together because then I was working out of their shop,
sure,
all the time on her stuff. But, so that, you get into like a totally different mindset. And it was probably a big learning curve there because now, you're taking at the time, she was probably 14 years old, and, I wasn't that old myself, but now you have to be the teacher, and
right. Very different role.
Yes, exactly. Much different role. But one that I came to appreciate and enjoy. I think in my personal career, my professional, what I do outside of racing to make money, racing has helped me more than probably anything. I think what it takes, the work ethic it takes, and my parents were both very hard workers. As I said, my mom and dad both worked full-time jobs, 5 kids. My dad would come home, work on cars at night for some extra money so we could go on vacation. So, that's ingrained in you. You really don't know any different. But, it's just kind of building off of that at a young age. As you go to school, you come home, you pedal your bike down, you work on a race car till 9 or 10 o'clock at night, you go home, you go to sleep, and you do the same thing over, from at that time it wasn't like it is now where you start racing in April and ending at the end of October. But it was, from Daytona 500, you started working on your race car, and then you would go racing around May. But, we approached Wes Kuhn at the time. Wimmers were tied in with Wes Kuhn, and, Chuck's like, well, what do you think about running speed weeks? And, I'll be honest, at first I was like, she had like no super late experience. But the best thing that I could ever recommend a younger kid is to go to speed weeks.
Really?
Strap a 4-barrel on. You're going to have more power, right? You're going to get to lots of practice. You're going to get to race every night or most nights. Now, this year was kind of interesting. I think they only raced like 5 super late model shows.
I was wondering I didn't pay a lot of attention, but I was like, I didn't notice as much super late model stuff.
No, that was the first year that they did that. But when we went down there, I think we were off like one night, and just the repetition, to go down there, get all that practice, actual racing events, 35 lappers, 50 lappers, 100 lappers. I think we came back here and we went down there, ran mid-pack. I would say at that time they were averaging probably 30, 35 super lates. We were 15th, 20th, the first year we went down there. But we came back here, and, I remember the first race at Golden Sands we ran, and she didn't qualify in the show. Natalie didn't. And, this is when they're getting 30-some super lates at Golden Sands. And so we had to race our way through the semi. She won the semi. She started dead last and came to the checkered flag passing for the lead. She went from the back. She finished second in her first super late race. And I thought, holy cow, that was impressive. You know what I mean? And I think a lot of that was attributed to the experience that she had, down at New Smyrna, with just bigger horsepower, just came back here. I would guess she would say it probably was a little bit easier, probably was smoother for her. But we did very well, that first year at Golden Sands, and then we ran Wausau. But she actually reminded me a lot of Mark. She was very smooth. She was smooth on the throttle. Same thing. Wasn't a heavy breaker. So it's funny when you look back how things kind of aligned. But it probably helped me. That aspect helped me. That I had to help coach. As far as maybe how to drive a racetrack, which is curious, right? Because I never drove myself. But as far as driving style. She had a very similar driving style to Mark. So I think that was a big help, for me.
Sure. And I've never been down to watch speed weeks, never ran speed weeks. What's it like to run speed weeks all those days back to back to back? What does that take? It's
money.
Money.
Definitely money. But like you go to, let's say Snowball Derby, people go down there. I mean, now you're talking $30,000, and I'm guessing speed weeks is about the same thing to go down there. But, unless you're going down because you want to get a NASCAR ride, if that's your intent and you think that you legitimately can go down there and, win at Snowball Derby, then fine. Go spend $30,000, or you have the money. Go spend $30,000, go run that race. But if you're looking for experience, why not go spend $30,000 to run 7 or 8 nights during the week, get a couple hours of practice, you have the test day, right? You're hitting the racetrack just for hours and hours in that week and a half. So it's if things go good. So the first year we went there, actually the first couple years we went there, things went well. Never wrecked anything. Then I would say speed weeks is fun. The third year we went there, not fun. you're getting caught up in wrecks. You're at the racetrack early. You're there late. You're not getting to enjoy. But yeah, the first year we went there, I remember, we ran, the expectation is different, right? I mean, first time in a super late, we weren't going down there with the expectation that we're going to go win win the World Series of asphalt.
Right.
We expected to hopefully run, mid-pack and, go catch a race at Volusia or go to the, Daytona for the truck race, whatever. I mean, that was kind of, so it was different, but you look at what Speed Weeks is now, with the big teams, Donnie Wilson, Wilson Motorsport. I mean, those guys, they're at the racetrack every day, but that's their job, in fairness, that's their job. They're going down there. Somebody's paying a lot of money to rent those rides, so that's the expectation is that car, if I'm a dad writing a big paycheck, then I expect that everything is meticulous on that race car. So it was fun though. I would like to go back, maybe not necessarily as a crew member. It can be, like I said, when things go well, it's okay, but it can be intense. It's a lot of, you're racing the next night. So you gotta, if you wreck something or something happens or a motor failure, you're changing the motor. It's just, you're not coming back and, okay, I have till next Friday to go, before I got to head back to the racetrack. No, you're racing the next night. So you got to start to squeeze all that stuff. You're not in your shop, right? If you go down there and you're a little bit off, now you're trying to scale the car at the racetrack. And it's just, okay, here are my numbers at the shop and here I am. But you look at the slab and it's crooked and, it's a much different thing, but it's cool. I think whether it's racing or just to go watch, if people could experience it, I would highly recommend it. But I think, I'm a asphalt, dirt, doesn't matter. I like, both, but I think doing the whole thing, going to Daytona, going to New Smyrna, going to Volusia, like that's what I want to go back.
Really getting that experience while you're down there.
Thing, not just because some of the races at New Smyrna, I mean, I'm not going to lie, they're boring. They like the 35 lap super late races. There's not much passing, so it can be pretty boring. But it's a cool experience that I would certainly recommend to anybody. Whether it's, like I said, taking your kid down there. I think Dan Fredrickson said part of the reason why Ty went down there this year because, and I agree with him 100%. It's good experience to go down there and run. Now Ty is probably a year late because he lit the world on fire, last year. So maybe he didn't get as much out of it as he would, a year prior. But
sure.
Regardless, I think it's good for young up and coming racers if you have the budget to go down there. Yeah, and I think it's good that you kind of throw those numbers out there. $30,000 to go run the Snowball Derby or $30,000 to go run Speed Weeks, and I think it's good for people to kind of, people know racing costs money, but sometimes I think I'm kind of talking about the from afar race fan kind of a thing, or someone that even knows a racer. Well, hey, why don't you go do this race, or why don't you do that? And it's like, well, it takes money. And they're like, oh, okay, yeah. Well, I think sometimes they don't understand, how much money it actually takes, and and then it's not just money. It's a crew of 5, 6, 10, 12 people to go down there and make it all happen, and all those people are taking off work and and hopefully have PTO and to go make that happen. And it's not $30,000 like that's your race car, that's everything. No, that's your expenses. Yeah. That's your tire bill, that's your lodging, that's your food, that's your pit passes. That has nothing to do with a race car. That has not one thing to do with the race car. So yeah, it's very expensive. And I'm guessing that $30,000, I mean, that's what like Fenhaus is to go down there. I mean, there are people that are on an even higher budget, right? Yeah. I would say that's more of your, or renting a ride to go there every single night. Yeah, that's your, as sad as it sounds, I would say that's more of your entry level. $25,000 to $30,000, I would say, would be more of your entry level. Like you can't, unless you're gonna pack each other in a hauler, 7 people in a little hauler and sleep in a hauler. That's what it's gonna cost, to go down there. Yeah, exactly. So you're helping Natalie. You come back from there. Where did things really kind of continue off with Natalie? Yep. So she, Natalie started to obviously gain a little bit more exposure. And, I will say, people really are, there's some pretty evil people in the world. I think social media, there's a lot of good things, but there's definitely bad with social media. And, people are, I think, jealous. Really, I don't know.
People are jealous of anyone that has any amount of success. Yeah.
And, jealous of how she's getting there, right? If she's good looking and she can help utilize that to get her to the next level, why wouldn't you? I mean, anybody, if I have a tool in my arsenal to help me get to the next level, aren't you going to use it? Why would you not use it? And people just look at it as, oh, she's doing this to get there. And, truth be told, she was very good at, I thought she was a good race car driver.
Yeah.
I would help coach her, hey, I think you need to be 2 feet up on the racetrack and bring it down. And I will tell you, like clockwork, and this is over the radio, as she's on the racetrack, like clockwork, she would go 2 feet here and she would hit her mark, and she would hit it every lap after that, and I think that's why, we had success too, because she was, I don't care who's at, I'm not Chad Knaus, you know what I mean? She's good at what she did. You don't win races by chance. There's people that have been paired up with good people that have not won. You know what I mean?
Yep.
So she was, I feel like there's people that know that, but I think in general, she gets a lot of bad rap.
Oh, for sure.
And I don't get it. You know what I mean? I don't get it. And, that's life. I mean, there's nothing that we can do about it, but it's one of the things that I think sometimes bothers me about social media, in general, even from a racetrack standpoint. If I was a billionaire, the last thing I would do was buy a racetrack. You can't win. It rains. Why did you do this? The sun came out. It's just, you see the negativity that people have. Their butt's not on the line, right? They're not the one that's doing it. They're not the one that's racing. It's easy for somebody to sit back behind their computer and point out somebody's flaws, or they did this, or they did this wrong, or they screwed up. But at the end of the day, we're human, we had, I think I helped Natalie for 6 or 7 years, and we had a good
You were with her that long? Okay. Yeah, I can't even remember.
We had a good stint. From the trucks, we raced trucks. We raced her. I didn't really, super stocks were not my thing. I couldn't tell you the last thing. I know you probably have that down pat, but that was not my thing.
That was a lot of my dad. Yeah.
Yeah. I just, totally different.
Yeah, it's a metric GM chassis. Yeah, exactly. It was not built off the line at GM to go racing.
No, exactly. Exactly. So I never got into that, but her limited late, her truck, her super late, and we had success in all of them, and I think, probably something that I'm most proud of, to go win races in her limited late, to go win races in her truck, to go win races in her super late. As I said, you don't do that by luck. People can say what they want, but, she was good at what she did, and when she got to the next level, she went and raced some NASCAR races. I mean, look at the equipment she's in, it's not like it was top notch, especially some of the Xfinity stuff, but good for her, good for her. I mean, I would imagine you would love to be able to say, I don't care what car it is, I got to race an Xfinity race. How, so, when people say, she ran like crap, or, so-and-so ran like crap. Well, at least they're there, right? That's more than what you and I got to do, so don't be jealous just because they got to run a truck race, an Xfinity race, a cup race, I don't understand why people can't be more happy, for people in general.
Jealousy is the thief of all joy. So,
exactly.
and people get sucked into it. And I think whether it's Natalie or anybody, talk about social media being, kind of that evil thing, and looks or whatever, and racing is based off money, sadly, and it's what takes people to the next level, and there's a lot of politics involved, and whether it's a person looking to spend money to sponsor a car, they want a whole package deal in it. They want someone that can drive, they want someone personable, that's marketable in whatever way it may be, and that's what it takes, and you can be however, but if you're not a very personable person, you can't talk to people, you can't stand in front of a microphone, well, driving will get you somewhere, but it might not get you where you want to go.
Absolutely. I think a prime example, we talked about Ty. I mean, probably one of the best short track racers. I think a lot of people struggle in general. I don't know, maybe this is a question for you, like your grandpa at the time. I mean, in the heyday, was he, I think he was always well liked, him and Trickle, and, the guys were always well liked, but did he ever tell you, was there a dynamic there where people were jealous or, kind of, I mean, they didn't have social media back then, but,
Yeah, I don't really know. I know, the one thing I came to actually learn and realize is I never realized that, there was a big, with some people, a split between like Refner and Trickle fans, and like, the Trickle fans didn't like Refner, the Refner fans didn't like Trickle. I mean, it was a long time in my life where I met someone that I was caught off guard when someone's like, I was a big Tommy Refner fan, and oh man, I did not like Dick Trickle. I'm like, what do you mean? Like, those guys are buddies. I figured if you like Tom Refner, you like Dick Trickle. I never really thought about it like that, and but I never really heard a whole lot about them talk about jealousy or anything, people being jealous or whatnot. And, I never really heard a whole lot of anything like that.
And I think that's why,
but there wasn't social media either. It was racing newspapers with good writers and journalists.
I think that's why I attribute a lot of the, if you want to call it, animosity towards social media, because that is the differentiator, right? You didn't have that, and now you have that, and people didn't have that platform to be, for lack of better terms, bullies, you know what I mean, on social media.
The only time a race fan's opinion mattered is if they were yelling something out in the stands. Exactly. They couldn't do it all week long. And
that was, and at that, I would say that was probably healthy for the racetracks, right? I think, to your point, I mean, even if it was, they didn't know at the time, but, Trickle and Refner, you don't think that brought people to the races? I mean, I think that's what we're missing, a part of what we're missing. But, I mean, there was rivalries, but I just, I didn't live that. Sometimes I think I should have been born 20 years earlier or 30 years earlier. I'm kind of a younger guy in an old guy's, world. But we don't have that, and I see even now, like with Ty, people like, why would you not want him to have success? Like, how cool is it to say, hey, we ran against this guy all the time and he's winning the NASCAR Craftsman Truck Series championship. Like, I think that's cool. And I think people don't appreciate things until they're gone, right? People look back, I'm guessing maybe in the 70s and 80s, people did not appreciate, now they look back, you fast forward 20 or 30 years and they, those were the heydays. And, I don't know if we will, but maybe in 20 years we'll be going, remember in 2010, this. I mean, I think history repeats itself, but I think Ty is going to be one of those people, and I got to be careful because I don't want to compare him to Dick Trickle. I don't think there's anybody, but he's going to be one of those guys, right? That in 20 years we look back and we say, look at what he accomplished. There's nobody. I mean, a Bubba Pollard, you could argue, had a few years ago, had some years where he strung together 20 some races, he won. But in general,
and that's usually what it is for people. You got a handful of years of being at the top, not a decade.
Yeah, exactly.
And, you're keeping a whole team together. You're keeping a lot of information close, and it's exactly.
It's impressive, So I mean, then once Natalie kind of moved on to the next thing in her life, that is when I started. Well, I actually started helping my brother-in-law Jerry for a couple years, and Jerry got to a point. Jerry raced snowmobiles, and now he was racing 4-cylinders. So I think his dad at the time said, okay, fine, we can do this. Well, then Jerry bought a limited late, and they didn't know me that well at the time. The whole reason why I got caught up with Jerry is not because of my now wife. It actually was because I think Jerry had a little thing for Natalie at the time.
Okay.
So he was hanging around the 4 camp a little bit. And so Jerry just asked, hey, do you, I bought a limited late. It was actually Cardell Potter's old limited late. And I mean, it was road hard, and so he got this thing. And before I even started helping him, and I was like, okay, I went over there. I'm like, whew, I mean, it was built like a Sherman tank. I mean, it was everything. I mean, the front clip had stock lowers, so it had actual spring cups. It wasn't a coilover. So I'm like, okay, this is kind of different. The back end, it was just, everything was, 120 wall, like this is to the point where now, people are looking at lighter weight cars, and it's like, Jerry buys this thing that's, the chassis probably, we had like 20 pounds of lead on the thing, and so I'm like, okay, this is going to take some work. And, Jerry didn't know. I mean, Jerry didn't care, he's whatever, 16, 17 years old. He's like, yeah, whatever. So, I'm, and I didn't know this at the time, as I obviously got closer with their family, they were telling me the story. So, he brings this car over, puts it in his dad's shop. And, I said, go buy some grinding wheels and Sawzall blades. And he did. And I went over there and I had this thing just hacked apart. I mean, I pretty much right behind the driver's seat, cut the whole rear clip off and cut the front end apart. And, his dad told me later, he's like, I told Jerry, like, who the hell is this guy? And what did he just do to our race car? Like, I basically have a roll cage, that's left on this thing. But Jerry actually, he had a lot of success. He won right out of the gate. He sold it to Brock Heinrich. Brock, won in it. Okay. And that, I don't know what happened to it after Brock had it, but so yeah, I helped Jerry, with limited late. We went super late racing. We won we won once down at Golden Sands and once at Wassa in super late. And then his dad said, you know what, this is too expensive, right? I can't go snowmobile racing and I can't go, stock or super late racing both because, he was at that point, he wanted to move up from a pro light to a champ sled. Well, I mean, you're going to Canada, you're going all over the place. Right. And, I think they said it was like, $60,000, $80,000 to go race snowmobiles all over the place by the time you did it right. So his dad said, you got to pick. And I said, Jerry, are you sure? Because, at that point I was not quitting racing. So I'm like, this might be it, and nope, I'm going to go snowmobile racing. So he went snowmobile racing. He was already racing snowmobiles with the Fenhauses. So Al Fenhaus.
Okay, yeah.
And Matt Schultz. Matt's mom and dad actually live right across the street from Brickner's. Okay. So that's how they got tied in. So that was what led me to help Luke, because I had been to some races with Jerry. I went to 2 snowmobile races with Jerry, and I'm like, you know what? Like 0 degrees, hours in between every race. Like, it wasn't my cup of tea.
Yeah, I was going to ask you. I felt like I remember seeing you because my friend Cody Knudsen was running champ at that point. And I thought I remember you helping around a little bit on the snowmobile stuff too.
I mean, it was interesting, right? It's still there. It's more, it's still handling, but motor, spark plugs, looking at your plugs and making sure you're getting the most horsepower and humidity and barometric pressure and, all this stuff. And not that that isn't exciting, but I just, to go there at 8 a.m. and get done in the evening and race 2 or 3 times, I'm like, okay, this is not my deal.
Yeah, I'd rather sweat than freeze
any
day.
Exactly. So yeah, that's what, Fenhauses were helping him. Al was building motors and stuff for Jerry. And so we were actually up at Tomahawk. Jerry was racing snowmobiles, and he was working out of Matt Schultz's trailer. And Al said, Luke's, whatever, looking at getting in a truck. And I think Luke at the time was like 11 years old or something like that. He's like, Luke is looking at getting into a truck. Would you mind, maybe coming out in the spring and testing? So I'm like, yeah, I'll I didn't know at that time, I didn't know who I was helping. So I'm like, yeah, I'll come out and I'll.
Did you have plans to help anyone else at that point?
Okay. No, I had no plans. And so, April rolled around, and, Luke, I think, is at 12 at the time. We go out to the racetrack. And, I mean, Luke, did really good in the Bandoleros. So my expectations were probably a little bit higher than they should have been. I'm like, okay, this kid's winning all these Bandolero races, no suspension. I mean, these kids are hopping around the racetrack, and, no fear. And we went out there, and this is the first time he had a shift, a vehicle, but he had, practiced in a manual in his dad's driveway. But it was, I remember watching go out on the racetrack, and I think maybe if you would have turned the idle up to about 3,000 RPM, that was about the speed that he was going around the racetrack. And, I'm thinking, oh my God, what did I get myself into? I'm like, I'm thinking like, where's the disconnect? This kid's going like crazy in a Bandolero, and here we are in a truck. He's going like 10 miles an hour around the racetrack. And, so the first session, whatever, didn't say anything. Go out there the second session, and, I'm trying to like, okay, you need to pick up the throttle here. You need to let off here, and I remember walking down in the infield, and, still really wasn't doing, every lap. Okay, pick up the throttle here, 2 seconds later, and I don't know what clicked in that kid's head, but the third time we hit the racetrack, I would say the kid never looked back after that. It was literally like a light switch. He went out there, and all of a sudden, hey, that's like fast time the last time, we hit the racetrack here. And, I think over the past, so Luke is 21, I think. So, call it almost 10 years, that I helped Luke. His ability to go to different racetracks and adapt immediately. I've never helped anybody that can, anybody that I ever helped. I mean, in fairness, Mark never went outside really his wheelhouse, right? I mean, we ran Marshfield, Plover, Wassa. I never went. Maybe we went to Norway once. That was probably the most outside of Mark's, but in general, he ran at the same racetrack. So he wasn't like figuring things out. Like Natalie, Jerry, like if we went to a new
everything
racetrack,
was new to them when you were helping them.
And it was, I'm not going to lie. I mean, usually the first event was rough, or most of practice, you were just you couldn't change anything because they were trying to learn the racetrack. Where like Luke, just, we'd go to a new racetrack, and I don't know how, I don't know what, as a race car driver, how you're able to figure out how much brake. I mean, I think that's what impressed me most about Luke is, it's not just when do you get on the gas or when do you get off the gas, it's how much brake do you apply? How do you roll through the corner? And sure, he's evolved, and developed as a driver and gotten better and better, but out of the gate, he had success, and I remember going to Golden Sands, and I think the truck rule was, so I think we ran like 2 races that first year, and I couldn't even tell you how he did. Second year, he was 13, he could run on tracks a half a mile, less than a half a mile. At 14, you could run on tracks a half mile and bigger, so you could run the full series. So I remember the first race, I think was for him, was Golden Sands. And John Wood said, here's a book, like a 13-year-old kid is going to read a book, but here's a book on, really developing, like expectations and stuff for younger racers.
Interesting.
And the moral of the story was, you're not going to win. You're not going to win. Like, don't set your expectations that you're going to win. Well, I think that first year Luke won like 2 out of the 5 races that he ran, and so, I think Derek still might be the youngest at the Halloween, I think, in the truck series. He was, I think, 13 years old. He might have even been 12, but he was young, when he won. But, and then it just built from there. Next year, he ran, we decided to run the truck series again. I had this brainy idea of, okay, Al, I think your kid's ready for super late. And I did. I wouldn't have said that if he wasn't, but I'm like, Al, I think your son is ready to, run super late. And he's like, really? And so, I was still, same thing with, when Natalie raced, we raced for Wes Kuhn. So still racing for Wes. Now Luke's in the car. And so we decided we were going to run Golden Sands full-time, State Park full-time in the super late, and then the truck series full-time. Well, we got, I think, into about the end of June, and now there was, I don't know if there was a rain out, something, but there was a scheduling conflict. But we were in a predicament because he was leading the championship at State Park in super late.
Okay.
He was leading the championship at Golden Sands in super late, and he was leading the truck series points. So what do you do? What do you do?
That's a tough situation.
Yeah. And the conflict was between Golden Sands and the Midwest trucks. So we said, you know what, we're gonna run the Midwest Truck Series because we felt it would be good for him to get more different tracks, be able to go to all the tracks in Wisconsin. And I don't think they were running at Grundy at the time, but I think they ran at Norway, most of the tracks in Wisconsin. So we decided to run the whole truck series schedule. We ran all of Golden Sands. I think he still finished like second in points at Golden Sands, but because of that one race, I think Eswine ended up winning the championship. I remember him telling us at the banquet, he's like, yeah, I'm glad you guys couldn't, run that one race because, it helped me win the championship that year. But, the poise that he had at 14 years old, to win, he won truck races at the Dells. I'm trying to think of Marshfield. I think he won both races. Wassa, he won 3 or 4 super late races. One ended up winning the championship. The youngest, you think about the storied history of State Park Speedway to be the youngest, and now unfortunately will be the youngest ever, to win a championship at State Park, at 14 years old to win a super late championship, in wild fashion. We went there. We were in a tight battle with Justin Mondyke, and basically it was whoever beat whoever was going to win. And our car was not perfect on the last night, but we had the only way to win. Neil Knobloch was leading the feature, and Neil was protecting the bottom. And the only way that we could make it happen was to go on the outside. And I remember, Neil, Mondyke, and then Luke was third. And so it's like, well, we have to go out there. I mean, there's no ifs, ands, or buts. And it was not easy by any means, but we managed to get by Neil. And I think actually we needed one buffer. So we needed Neil to finish second.
Okay.
And Justin needed to finish third. So we went by both of them on the outside, and they come to the white flag. And so Luke is going to win the race. But we still need Justin to finish third. And, Neil's hugging the bottom the whole race, and Neil slips up off a two and allows Justin underneath, and it's like, oh my God. And they go into three, Justin goes in there and kind of does what he needs to do to try to get into second. His only mistake was he wanted to punch the throttle to get back. And when they came out of four, Justin punched the throttle and did a slow spin, and Neil beat him to the line by probably 2 feet.
Oh, no
and
kidding.
Because of that, Luke ended up winning the championship there. But, I obviously it's a cool memory because I can remember it like it was yesterday. But, and then after that, it's like, we need to, let's go run bigger stuff. Let's go run bigger stuff. So we started then dabbling into, the Midwest Series, other races, and it kind of led us to, where he got, I guess, today. It's really what I would say really, he had success at a local level, but he had Jeff Nowak at the time. He races actually some dirt stuff with Jeanette's, but Jeff owned a landscaping company up in Wausau, and Matt Schultz and Harvey, I don't know, you probably know Harvey that helped in snowmobile racing. So they knew Jeff, and so they talked Jeff into, Jeff had bought a new Fury chassis and said, can Luke race a car? So, Jeff said, yeah, so Jeff was basically the car owner for a couple of years, and that's kind of on more of a regional stage, right? That's kind of what I would say elevated Luke. Not saying we couldn't have done it, but it still goes back to money, time and money. And, if you're going to be traveling, you need to have some money, a budget behind you. So we raced, with Jeff for a couple of years, and then now Justin Schultz that owns Done Right Exteriors, still Luke's car owner to this day. But Luke, we got another brand new car, and, kind of the ball kept rolling from there. But it's expensive. That first year Justin bought a brand new car, I think Al, myself, Matt, Harvey, everybody, built the car, bought the chassis, and built the interior, hung the body, we did everything ourselves. And I still think they had like over $50,000 without the motor, without the motor and transmission. So by the time you buy a $20,000 motor, $5,000 transmission, you got $75,000 in, and you did all the work.
Right.
That's not even somebody, going and just buying a Fury, put it all together. Now you're talking probably six figures, to get a race car. But it's hard not to do that and compete. We knew what our goal was. Obviously it was winning, but it was winning on a, going to Slinger and winning. It was going to Madison and winning. It was going to Kaukauna. It was going to, we wanted to go places and run up front. And I don't think we would have not been able to do that with our, 5, 6, 7-year-old Victory Circle that was fine, for racing locally, just not on a, national, more regional scale.
Right. When you guys are running I got to say Midwest trucks, because you got the Craftsman truck in the mix now too. But when you're talking Midwest trucks, and, you said you brought up to Al, hey, I think Luke's ready for a super late, and, and you think about where someone ends up in their career and, timing being everything. Did you bring that up to them at that point because you knew where maybe they ultimately wanted to be, and you really recognized, hey, I think he's got it, like you got to do it now kind of a thing? Or, where did that thought really, why did you think to bring it up to him at that point?
I think anything in life, whether it's me personally with my job, so obviously you relate to your personal experiences, and that's kind of how you mentor and coach people. But, I always tell people, if you're comfortable at your job, and not saying there's anything wrong with being comfortable at your job, there's people that are perfectly content with it. But if you want to grow in your career, whether it's as a race car driver, whether it's, in your job that you go to from 9 to 5 every day, like you should not be comfortable. You know?
100%.
And I learned at a young age, like, when your boss or your crew chief or whatever, they come to you and they give you something and you say, yep, I can do that. Even though in the back of your head, you're thinking, oh my God, how am I going to be able to do this? I've never done this before. But putting yourself in those scenarios more and more, throughout your life, only makes you better. It only, there is, while it's painful at the time and, makes you think about life in general, while it's happening, there's no better way to learn that skill than doing it, right? So I felt like, well, the truck series, I think the truck series is honestly, it's the best series out there, period.
Yeah, it's awesome.
It's from a cost perspective, from the competition, you got your
it's well advertised.
Yep, you got your veterans. I mean, it's just a hands down, it's a great series run by great people, from John Wood to, the person taking the tickets at, the pit gate. I think they just got a phenomenal series, but, I just felt like he needed more, and it was a gut thing. Did I think, I can sit here and lie to you and say that I knew that he maybe would be racing on Friday nights in the Craftsman Truck Series. That wasn't my goal. My goal, whether it was Mark, whether it was Natalie, whether it was Jerry, whether it was Luke, was I wanted them to be successful. And I believe they wanted me to be successful. And I think that's why in all 4 pairings, we won races, with everyone, whether it was a limited late, super late truck, we won races and no matter what it was. And I think that's something that can't be faked, right? I mean, you have to be genuine about that. I thought of Mark, I thought of Natalie, I thought of Jerry, Luke, I didn't think of them as a race car driver. I thought of them as somebody that was special to me. And, when you do that, you want to fight hard for them. You want to fight, it's like fighting for a brother or sister, right? I would say all of them, that would be the best way to summarize my relationship with all my drivers is, I was, Mark, Jerry, now Jerry is my brother-in-law, but, Jerry, Luke, they were my brother, Natalie was my sister, you know what I mean? And, I would have done anything for her. I would have done anything for them, to help them be successful. And like I said, as a result, they put the same effort in, right? I didn't want to disappoint them. And I'm sure they didn't want to disappoint me, but, I was not, I say was, you ask my wife, she would probably tell you still am, but, I am not always the easiest person to work for because I expect excellence. I don't want to hear excuses. I think everybody has the same opportunity. I really do. I know some people are book smart, common sense smart, whatever. But in general, I think if you want something bad enough, you have the same opportunity. So that's where, I could be difficult, because I expected when I make a mistake, I want you to call me out. Even though I'm my own worst critic, I want you to call me out. But when you make a mistake, I'm going to call you out, and, I did that with every one of them. And I think I pushed them all very hard, but I don't think that I would have had the success that we did if it wasn't for that. I really don't.
Yeah. And, and I think, talking about, doing anything for them, people always talk about the racing family. And I think really any good race team, you got to come together like a family and feel like a family for it all to function well. And,
yep.
and I imagine that's probably what it was like.
Yep. And you have I mean, right? You literally
And you're gonna fight like a family too.
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, but that is the competitive nature. You know what I mean? I see Ty and Toby at the races, it's not common for them to struggle, but the races that they do, and there's bickering over there, you know what I mean? That's why, because they want to win.
Yeah,
right?
They're passionate and they care.
If you go, if you just go finish 10th, that's not what they're going to do, right? That's not what I'm going to do. And I will say this, I do think that at times for me, it actually became unhealthy. I think my competitiveness, and it goes back to what I talked about earlier, probably harder on my brother-in-law, and as he became my brother-in-law, or probably even harder on him, and not really fair to him. But I think that got to a point where maybe it was unhealthy because I didn't want to accept anything except, I don't want to say perfection, but, he maybe wanted a different perspective than, let's say, a Natalie or a Luke. At some point in their career, they realized, okay, I might have a chance, at this. So their expectation is different. Their work ethic has to be a little bit different. Like a Mark or a Jerry, they didn't want to do that. They wanted to go have fun. They wanted to have a beer after the races with their buddies. That's what they wanted. And, even to this day, I told Jerry, I have a hard time with that. Like, you're asking me to take everything I've worked hard for and, just say it's okay for me to finish 10th tonight, or it's okay for me to finish 5th tonight. That is not an easy thing to do. Even if I tell myself, they just want to go have a beer with their buddies. They want to go out here. They want to have fun. Like, fun to me is winning. And even though at times it's like the sleepless nights drive me nuts and I think, what am I doing? Why am I driving myself to the nut house, trying to win races? But to try to go back and go out on a Thursday night with Jerry and just, Tom, I just want to, go out there and have fun and spend time with my friends. It's like, that's not me. I mean, I just not me. And, that's been probably the hardest thing as of recent, when Luke isn't racing, I'll go out and help, because Luke wasn't racing at State Park. Okay, Jerry's going to run at State Park. Okay, I'll come out there and help. It's just a different set of expectations. And I can't flip that switch off. I just can't,
Yeah, it's ingrained in you. And I think, even myself, if I was going to a bigger race and, Ty Majeski showing up, Luke showing up, guys have been winning on that higher level, some of those bigger races. I've never went to a race going, hey, yeah, we're shooting for 10th today. It's kind of like, well, hey, we've been all right. We've been pretty decent, but we're going to try and hit on something in practice today, and things go well in the race. We might have a shot at this. And it's just, it doesn't turn off. And God bless anyone that there's sometimes that, and I'm sure you see it too. You watch people that go to a racetrack, with a different expectation, and you finish second that day or whatever, and then you watch them go home. It's like, they had a little more fun today than I did. But and everyone wants something a little different out of racing, and as long as they're getting what they want and they're having fun and it's what you want it to be, then hey, that's perfect. Keep doing it.
It's interesting. I have a memory that kind of hit me in the forehead. It wasn't even it was a couple of years ago when I was helping Luke, and we were parked next to another team, and a team that spends a lot of money to go racing, and they finished second. It was in the Jim Sauter Classic, and ran great. I mean, he ran a great race. Came in, and they were not happy. Not so much the driver. I'm not going to mention names, but not so much a driver, to the point where the driver broke down, and, when I said, kind of my own worst enemy there, but I kind of thought like, that's me doing the butt chewing, right? And while I can't take it out of me, like, and I'm not going to be able to take it out of me, like, I don't necessarily think that's a good thing. Like, I looked at that and I said, the kid ran great, did a great job. What normally should be celebrating, you got a driver in tears and people chewing him out because he didn't do this, that, or the other thing. And, I don't know if it's the amount of money that people are spending nowadays to go racing, especially, the upper echelon teams. But I don't think that's good. You know what I mean? And I'm not throwing stones because I'm telling you, I do the same thing, right?
Yeah.
But I don't think it's good. Like, I don't know. I also don't know how to fix it. I don't, as we talked about, I don't know how to flip that switch off. But there are some things, I remember Slinger, when we ran down there, first year we ran down there, did you ever run at Slinger?
No, I've never ran there.
It's an animal. And it's whatever you have for your setup, you just throw it in the garbage, to go there. You're not gonna run anything similar to anything you run at Slinger. And we went down there the first year, and nice, nice people, nice racers, you know what I mean? I think Luke actually we only ran there maybe 5 times. I think he won a couple features. Well, then he got accepted into the Quickie program, and we said, we're going to go down there. This is Alan Quickie's home track. We felt like running down there would give us a good shot at, potentially winning the Quickie, the whole championship. So,
and I was gonna ask you on that, because that was, a lot of racers, and myself included, tend to group to, maybe you're a Golden Sands and Marshfield, or, there's Kakana and some Slinger, or just Slinger. And really kind of from up here, that really one of the first people that I really recognized making the trip down there was you guys with Luke. Was that really what, transpired into wanting to go down there? Was the Alan Quickie program, or was it like, hey, that's a really tough track, there's a lot of really tough competitors, if we can go there and shine, like, you're going to do good?
It was, I would say, the Alan Quickie program. The year before, I think he might have applied, but I don't know if he didn't get accepted in. So we went down there I think we went down there maybe for the Carl Wagner. I don't even know if the Carl might have been living still, but we went down there for sure for the Quickie race. And like I said, Luke just had a knack for that race. He had, like I said earlier, really any racetrack we went to. But it was, we went down there the first time, and, this is where Al and I sometimes butted heads. So, Wimmers had run down there for several times. So, Wimmers gave him a setup or whatever. I had a setup, and Wimmers gave him a setup, but I had never ran there. So in fairness, I get why Al did it. But truth be told, I was a little pissed, right? I'm like, you're paying me to be your crew chief, and you're putting, even though I like Wimmers, I have no problems with them, you're going to run their stuff, in your car. And we went down there, and not good. It wasn't good. And, I had concocted something that I thought would work. And the truth of it is, I actually made a mistake. And that mistake ended up helping us hit on. Now, my bump stops remain the same, but how I was loading the bump stops, I made a mistake. And Luke went out, we took the other stuff off, we threw my stuff on, and he's like, this thing is really good. And he, went right up to the top of the board. It's like, holy cow, oh yeah, I knew what I was doing. But you're guessing. I never ran there myself. Yeah. You just have kind of an idea of maybe what it would take to run there. I knew the loads would be obviously much, much higher, but like I said, it was a mistake. And that setup, while we evolved on that setup, the general premise was what we ran the last 5 years. Now, I don't know exactly this last year, what they ran down there, but, and I would say on any given night, Luke was the guy to beat down there. The year we ran for the championship, I think there was a few rainouts. I think they had like 16 or 17 nights of racing. We set fast time every night but one. Rich Bickle beat us one night. Otherwise we set fast time every single night. It was just, it's a fun racetrack. But just like you talked about, Plover, there's a clique there. There's a clique at every racetrack, right? Yep. This is my home turf. The first year we went there, everybody was nice. The second year we went there, not so much. We got roughed around a little bit, bumped into, but it was probably a good learning opportunity for Luke. Like, you got to race people the way they're going to race you. Like, don't just get walked all over. But how do you tell at that time he's 16, 17 years old, how do you tell a kid that's 16 or 17 years old, to do it in, if you could say, a respectful fashion?
Yeah, I was just going to say that.
Go dump somebody, but
yeah. Because when you can get roughed up a little bit, but you don't want to end up tearing your stuff up and ruining your night. And to, like you said, do it I think it's a good way to put it, as a respectful manner without, to be able to keep your night together still, but get a point across.
Yeah. And the first race there was, they always run Sunday afternoon races. So, we're going to run the championship that year. And the first race was twin 75s, I think. And Luke him and April were racing for second, I think. And, it was getting a little rough. And they ended up spinning each other out on the white flag lap. And so you get dead last points for the first feature, and now because of that, you're starting dead last for the second feature. Okay. And I think he got up to, 6 or 7, but it's like, oh God, we're starting in the hole. And the next week we went there, we wrecked, and it's like, I'm thinking championship is going to be tough. But, all those fast times, running up front, winning races, we had a little help at the end of the year. The second to last race, Bickle, I don't know if you saw that. It was the last year he ran there full time.
I knew that, yeah.
But he hit hard. He had
in turn 3, right? Yeah. I remember that wreck.
So that, if that wouldn't have happened, we wouldn't have won the championship. But in fairness, we had bad races that year too. You could say if we wouldn't have had this bad race, Bickle wouldn't have had a chance either. So it all shook out. But I think, that year everything clicked. We went down to Madison for the Joe Shear Classic, and him and Bickle, raced side by side for the win there. Made a couple small mistakes, got off the racetrack going into one, but like I said, Luke was 17 years old at the time. You're running against all these guys, one of the biggest races we have here in the Midwest, and to go down there and run door to door. And, Rich Bickle is a very opinionated person, and I think that day he had a huge amount of respect for Luke because, 17-year-old kid, $10,000 to win race, quickie program.
Was probably just waiting to get booted out of the way.
Yep. So just to be able to do that, and, I get a lot of bad rap, probably in the spotter stand because crew chief, tire guy, spotter for all these people that I've helped. That's always been what I've done since I've helped Mark is all three aspects, and people are up in the spotter stand, you make a mistake and they're chewing you out, they think that I'm up there. But they're Bruce Noodleman, does all the videos and stuff. And, I'm sure Bruce listens to all the in-car audio. I think people would have a much different opinion of me if they listen to our audio, because I am the first person to point out being respectful, winning the right, way. And that race, there was a caution with, I think, 6 to go. And, I told him on the radio, we're going to win this. We're better than him. And we were. I wasn't just telling him that. We're better than him, but we're going to do it right. We're not going to go in there. We're not going to push up to the third groove, because I told him, I said, Rich is a guy, he will junk your stuff. He will junk your stuff. If you do that, he's going to come in the next corner. He's going to not lift, and he's going to right rear. It doesn't matter. You're not going to get away with bouncing him into the third groove. You're just not. So I said, we're going to do this right. And they did. They touched a couple times, but nothing. And I think honestly, Rich had no clue who Luke Fenhaus is. None. And I think that put Luke on the map. That race was what really elevated Luke by him being respectful, by him, losing the right way, and finishing second. It put him on the map. And, I didn't know this at the time, but Rich, had a lot of connections with the Kawicki, with Tom Roberts. Rich knew those guys very well. And I'm sure behind the scenes throughout the year, because we had a lot of battles with him at Dell's, at, Slinger. We never had a problem, one issue with him all year. And I'm sure he was our biggest advocate behind the scenes to say, this kid is something,
Yeah, and I feel like I would always see, like you said, Rich being opinionated. I feel like I'd always, see photos of Rich and Luke together, or Rich just having good things to say about Luke, and I imagine that when people see that speaks volumes of someone's character, and seeing that. So now seeing Luke go off and get a chance, and because he went down south originally to do Cars Tour, okay, and then it was a little bit of ARCA stuff, right? A couple races.
So yeah, he went down. So that year he won the Kawicki Championship. Then Chevy signed him on to be a development driver, and that team down there was Chevy's Cars team. So he got hooked up with them. He went down there. He won the championship in the pro late. He ran pro lates in the Cars Tour. And then, the hard part is any of those development programs, there has to be a mix of people with money and people not with money. And Luke doesn't come from a family with money, and so, Chevy signed him on as really no strings attached, and Lauren Rainier is in charge of Chevy's development program.
Okay.
And
yep.
So he picked out Luke. I'm sure same thing, you talk about stars aligning, he won the Slinger Nationals, youngest winner, 17 years old. The storied history of the Slinger Nationals, to be the youngest, all the people that have won, all the greats that have won the Slinger Nationals, like
all the greats that have tried to win and fallen short.
You think we talked about, Mark's ASA when, definitely Slinger Nationals those are right up there, right? Those are at the top of the list. But just so happens that year that this SRX series comes about, it's on national TV.
Oh yeah, I kind of forgot all about that.
The winner, they didn't do that at any racetrack. They tried it for the Slinger race, and it just so happens that Luke wins that race.
Right.
Now he gets to be on national TV in front of everybody, and should have won that race.
Yeah.
But Haley Deegan spun out, there it was the white flag lap. He was coming around to take the checkered, but in the SRX series, you had to take the checkered. I mean, if there was a caution on the white flag lap, you still went back and had a green, white checkered.
Wasn't it Marco Andretti that ended up winning?
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
Yep. So, Luke took the bottom, which has been, even to this day, our Achilles heel at Slinger. Luke needs laps at Slinger, to get going. You got to pick the outside. We've lost probably 4 races at Slinger because we've taken the bottom on a late race caution, and then the guy on the outside pinches you, and if you don't get a jump,
it's a good run up coming off, and away they go.
So he lost it, but regardless, it was a year where all the stars aligned. We ran. I mean, it was crazy the amount of. At one time, I had off the top of my head, we ran 32 races. He had 20 some fast times. I forget how many features he won. Our average finish was 3 points. I mean, it was crazy good stats, and not just there. but all over, the Midwest, he ran good. But that put his name out there, right? It's one thing to run good, even regionally, it helps. But when you got all these eyeballs on national TV, and all of a sudden people are wondering, who's this Luke Fenhaus kid? They see him running up front with Tony Stewart and all these greats of not just NASCAR, right? It's IndyCar. It's
right.
All these people that have been at the top of their leagues, and in a professional sports. And for him to be battling side by side in a car that is nothing like a super light, I think that, goes back to being able to adapt. I mean, you take it's a cup car, pretty much is what it was. Heavy car, crappy brakes. You take that, you throw this kid in there, you give him an hour of testing, and now he's out here battling with the best.
Yeah, and he easily could have finished last. And went, it's a lot different than a super late model. And people would have been, hey, you still did good. Yep, but no, yeah.
So it just, it aligned, and then he won it. Went down for Chevrolet, raced down there. And then, I'm sure we threw you a bone year one, we want you to bring something to the table, because he didn't bring anything to the table. And we are still racing super lights up here.
Okay.
So, is that the right thing to do? I mean, anybody that hits it and succeeds, they're going to tell you that was the right thing to do. But truth be told, there's a lot of luck to the stars.
There's no one path that takes you there.
Absolutely. So especially if you don't have money, that's the hard part. Like with what Ty's doing, right? He didn't bring money. He didn't bring money. So should Ty be in a cup car? Probably. If you're talking about talent, probably. But he doesn't have the checkbook behind him. He doesn't have the money.
Yeah, and I was gonna throw that in earlier. And I don't really know. I think I maybe talked to him maybe a couple times, but not much. And I don't really know him too much at all, and really never ran a ton against him. But that was, if people ever ask me, well, what do you think about Ty Majeski? And the thing I always say is, like, if he didn't make it at all in ever get a full-time ride, to me, that shows how bad our sport at the top is. If he couldn't get an opportunity, and like I agree, definitely deserves more. If you want talent in NASCAR racing, and you're not looking at that individual and someone picking them up regardless of money or not and trying to make it happen, that does not show well for what our sport is at a professional level. So it was like, when some of that stuff finally started happening, it's like, okay, well, it's kind of about time, because, well, if he can't make it, that doesn't, probably, Luke probably doesn't go, man, I have a chance too, if Ty can't get anything unless I'm bringing a ton with me, it's degrading. So yes. Yeah, it was, that was the one good thing about when you finally started seeing that happen.
Yeah. And then now he's having success. He's
right.
Tied in with a good organization, and
right.
I'm sure Ty, I'm guessing he would love an opportunity, but at this point, if I'm Ty Majeski, I'm not going to Xfinity to be in a crappy program, right? I would rather stay with ThorSport and run the next 10 years for ThorSport and be able to contend for championships, because that's what Ty, he's so used to winning races. I just can't imagine that he would want to go run for a, bottom tier team just to say that he ran Xfinity. I think he's going to want to put himself in position.
And actually, that exact comment, it just really sticks out of my mind. I don't know if you've ever heard this clip or heard this all. Corey LaJoie was just on an interview where he was talking about, I don't know whatever the prelude question was up to it. I just saw the clip of just his answer about him running in the Cup Series at the Daytona 500. And he was talking about, well, I want to run. I can't justify it to my sponsors to just go run and win races or whatever on a Friday night in a truck series. I gotta, to justify it, I gotta be at the top running in the Cup Series. And I don't know, he said something whatever else about guys that just spend their whole career in a truck series. And I'm kind of like, okay, man, like whatever. It's, it's not like you're a shining star at the top. Exactly. Like you said, you're running for Thor sport, and you're winning championships and doing well. It's a great place to be.
Absolutely. I would rather be in contention to win races than, like I said, running around, especially what he's
trying to build teams and having hardly any success.
I can't believe that he would want that, right? Even if he could, because it's not really doing anything for you, right? To go run in a bottom tier team and finish. Now I want to clarify in Ty's situation, right? There are people that want to just, hey, I got to run a truck race. I got to run it. There's nothing wrong with that.
Right.
And they're not gonna get a top tier Xfinity ride or a truck ride. So there's nothing wrong with that. But in Ty's situation, Ty wants to win races. If you do want to go to the next level, and you want to be one of the extremely lucky ones that does it without money behind you, you better be winning races on the truck level if you want to get a competitive Xfinity ride. And you better hope that by winning races in the truck series that a sponsor does come along.
Oh, exactly.
And then they can help you get you to the next level. But you're not, I just don't think he is, and he's old, for NASCAR, which sounds absolutely stupid. But I think Ty's got to be around 30 years old or so. I
think he's right around my age,
Yeah, so it's like he's too old, for the way some people look at it, right? They're already looking at the 16, 17, 18-year-olds that are running for Donnie Wilson or whoever else. Those are the people that are going to be the next, up-and-comers, if you want to call it that. I have a hard time calling it that. But I do think, though, that is a major disconnect. I was talking to my dad about that. We were watching the race or the 500 they came over. And I said, I don't care if you love Ty Majeski or you hate Ty Majeski. You are more than likely going to tune in to watch Ty Majeski.
Mm-hmm.
But when you have these kids, I have no clue who the hell they are. And I keep a pretty close eye on the short track scene, and I don't have a clue who these people are. And they get up there and they run a truck or even there are people in a cup car. And it's like, where the hell did they come from? And they are not, when you want to talk about NASCAR losing ties to grassroots, I think they're trying. I think they're trying with short tracks and, Bowman Gray and stuff like that. But the best thing they did was put Tim Brown and Burt Myers in the race.
Yeah.
Right?
That was cool.
People connect to them. They know who they are. That's why, I want Ty to be successful, because that Ty Majeski is going to help NASCAR, whether they think they, I'm sure they're so.
Whether they think they need him or not.
Yes. They need more Ty Majeskis, right?
Yes.
They need short track racers that have come through the ranks. I will say this much, whether his dad was Bill Elliott or not, Chase Elliott went through the ranks, right?
Yep.
And he went faster than maybe some, but it wasn't like he was racing a Bandolero and 3 years later he's in a cup car, right? He went and he raced a pro late, he raced a super late, and it was a few years in pro late, a few years in super late, right? And he slowly transitioned, but Chase Elliott's good. Ryan Blaney went through the ranks. There are guys that have gone through the ranks, but there's several guys that I have no clue who they are. Yeah, I don't even know. You Google them, and there's not even a history on their, what did they run a 4-cylinder? I don't even know what they ran, and I don't think that's good for NASCAR. I really don't.
No, it has to, there's got to be, fans got to resonate with drivers, and that drivers have a personality, and that's what's going to connect it. When I was 12 years old, I probably could have named every cup driver that was going to be in the race on Sunday. I could probably name 12 at this point that I feel like are decent. Yep. There's probably more than that, but the people know what I mean. And I completely agree. I think NASCAR's doing some things to try and connect that back. But I hope and I really and I agree with your comment. People are love or hate or people are going to watch. I've gone through phases where I didn't really watch a lot of NASCAR. I mean, I get together with some buddies and have a Daytona 500 party, but I mean, yeah, Ty and Luke right now, I turn on the Craftsman truck race more now than I ever have, or at least if I don't watch it, I lose. Oh, hey, I wonder how the Wisconsin boys did because I care, and it's cool, and it's healthy for the sport, and I think NASCAR definitely needs that. And so as Luke is kind of going through some of that stuff, were you, and then kind of he ends up going and running with Thor Sport in the truck, were you? Yeah, because he's never stopped running the super late up here at any point, and he always kept that going.
Yep.
Yeah.
So last year.
Last year was the first
year that I did not help Luke. So have 2 young kids.
Yeah.
And where I pulled the Rich Bickle where I was going to retire 5 times. And Fenhaus is one more year, and that went on for about 3 years. And then I'm like, okay, had Ashton, our son, and I committed to the year, and he wasn't born yet, so he was born at the end of November. They ran Snowball Derby that year, and I said, no way. I mean, they're like, oh, well, one of our sponsors has a plane, we'll fly you back. I'm like, no. I am not missing the birth of my first child. I don't care. There's nothing more important than that. Nope. I don't care if it's a Snowball Derby not happening. So I didn't go. And then the next year I did. I did still help Luke. Would be 2 years ago. And, I finished out the year, and where I knew my sign was that when I was at the racetrack, I wished I was up north with my family. I wished I was wherever they were. That's where I wanted to be. And, that was my sign, right? Yep. I mean, I loved racing, still do, but I had put everything. I mean, everything. I mean, when I was in my younger 20s, I wasn't chasing women. I was chasing race cars. That's all I cared about. I didn't care about anything else. I wanted to go racing. And, when I wanted to be where they were over the racetrack, I knew I was not going to have somebody pay me when my mind is in another spot.
Yeah, it's not good for you, and it's not good for your family, and it's not good for the race team either.
And I think my wife never thought that day was going to come, and my family, my brothers and my sister would always be like, oh, Janessa, I think he's going to be a good dad and stuff. And not that sounds bad, like she thought I was going to be a bad dad, but she thought I was going to, just never give racing up. And now, I've kind of made a 180 where I miss it. Honestly, I don't. And it's not like I'm.
Did you go to the racetrack at all last year?
I did. Yep. I went with Jerry. I think one race maybe, but I didn't. It's in that aspect. It was a little bit easier to flip the switch off because, I didn't. It wasn't like I was up there, spending nights in the shop and getting them ready.
Yeah, you weren't as invested.
Jerry, here's what you need to do. You and your buddies do it, and if it's close enough, it's close enough, because I don't want to say I wanted to just have fun, but it's as close to Tom just having fun as I can possibly get. And it's because, I took my son out there and, he was just on practice night and, he just thought it was the coolest thing, in the world. And so, that is, now really my focus. And someday, if, I think everybody thinks it's a guarantee, but honestly, I don't care what my kids are interested in. I really don't. If they want to do soccer, we're going to do soccer. If they want to, go jet skiing on the weekends, we're going to go jet skiing on the weekends. But
we're going to have the fastest jet ski, but we're going to go jet skiing.
Yes. I don't know how to set one up yet, but I'll figure it out. Yeah. But I mean, whatever they want to do, I am not going to push them into racing. When kids get older, if they want to go to races, I hope they do, I mean, even as spectators, but I don't have a problem with them not getting involved in it. Part of me doesn't want them to get, in the racing.
It's weird to say that, isn't it?
Yes, it is. I have seen people that have been in good positions in their life put themselves in very precarious situations in their life over the competitiveness of racing. And while I think from a financial perspective, I think I'm somewhat intelligent, I can see myself being one of those stupid people that I'm so competitive that I drive myself to the poorhouse because I want to win races with Ashton or Jana. And so I'm spending stupid amounts of money, not paying this bill or paying that bill so we can go spend $100,000 on a brand new Fury with a brand new Wagner engine. I don't want to even put myself in that position.
No, I know exactly what you mean. That like you said, I think people think it's a given that hey, Tom's kids are Colin's kids are going to race one day, and Jerry Guiley's episode hasn't come out yet, but Jerry and I talked a little bit, and I kind of said and he talked about drivers up and coming, and hey, you shouldn't be worried about NASCAR, and I think that was one of the things too is. I'm not going to push my kids into racing by any means. And my first thing on it is I was an only child. I was only grandchild on the Refner side of my family. My aunt and uncle didn't have a niece or nephew on the Refner side. I mean, there's a lot of attention and focus and money put towards me. And I only went so far, you know what I mean? And it's everyone's goals are different, but yeah, I mean, my parents could only take me so far, and my parents put a lot into me, and I want to be there for, same thing. I got 2 kids. I want to be whatever. I just want my kids to be passionate about something. If they're really passionate about it, I want to see them give their all to it, and I'm going to back each of them, whatever it is, 100%. And if I got 2 kids that are racing, I'm not going to be able to back them completely 100% and take them to where their dreams aspire. Yeah. And it's kind of a similar thing if one of them, and definitely not at 6 or 7 years old, and I wouldn't bring it up to them or ask them at a young age because number one, I'm not going to ask them, and I'm glad I got into racing at I think where the world is now than where it was 25 years ago is a lot different, and racing is a lot different. But I think if they're 12, 14, 15, and they're like, hey, Dad, I wouldn't mind, running a street stock or something. Like, okay, yep. Well, let's chat and let's look at that a little bit, and let's talk about our expectations, and we'll go from there. But so it's kind of cool to hear you talk about that, and actually, it's one and there's gonna be some changes in my racing coming up, and I think I noticed when you made that 180, and I kind of admired that from afar, just seeing it off of Facebook essentially. And I think a similar thing is like, and my wife, thank God, a lot of times she's able to bring the kids to most of my races, unless it's far away or, late night or something. So it's good to have them a part of it. And that's fun. But I lost a little bit of a train of thought there, but yeah. So what I was saying is like I admired that, and that you made that change, and I would say even when you had that, the question I would ask is when you had that thought of like, hey, I know my mind's a little bit more there, was it easy for you to be like, hey, yeah, I know it's the right decision, I'm making it like.
Yeah, that was the hardest part actually. So I knew I was going to do it, but in the back of your head, you have this weird, at least I did, this weird thought, like you talk about family, like racing's your family, knowing all these people, for the last 25 years. I mean, I spent 25 years in racing. It's just going to magically going to go away, and they're going to forget about you and you're going to forget about them. And that's not the case. Right, that's going to happen, but I think those are the thoughts that cross my mind, and while they haven't been to be true, it was hard, to go there. Do I still, I'm up north and Luke is racing at Madison, do I still have race monitor pulled up? And
yeah, and you're stepping back away from a very successful race team.
Yep. I mean, just in like cold turkey. I mean, it was nothing, absolutely nothing, no involvement. And, it actually, now that time has passed, absolutely no regrets. And, the best decision that I've ever made. And, Luke and I still communicate all the time. The one thing that I don't want to say, I don't know how to put it, not regret, but I want to see him be successful. And, me not being there, it's like that's a piece of the equation that doesn't exist anymore in its life. But, I just hope he can continue the success because it's hard, and I think, he found out, right? I mean, at the beginning of last year, it was a struggle, a big struggle for them. And when you're used to competing and running up front and now you're struggling and, it went back to what I was talking about earlier. Like you have a crew chief, and I don't want to be in a position that at times I was put in my career where now you're bringing somebody else into the fold unless your crew chief says, I'm fine with that. You know what I mean? I don't think that's the right approach, to go about things. So, Luke called me before Kaukauna last year, Dixieland. And, he said, I got to run good. Duke Thorson is going to be up there, I got to run good, and it's like, you don't wave a wand, but it's, we didn't win. The last 3 or 4 years, he was in the top 3, at the Dixieland 250. So I said, I don't know what you're running, but here's what to put in. And I said, you need to measure everything. Nope, everything's, I said, no, everything. You need to go through everything, your pivot points, whatever. And he, short of a late, I don't know if you watched Dixieland 250, he led the last tail end, and then him and Luke drove over his head a little bit on the restart. He wanted to pick the outside, which was the right thing to do. And the crew talked him into picking the inside. Well, turn 1 there, you're the leader. You got the edge. So you can get a jump on the start. You can pinch that guy down into 1. That guy on the bottom doesn't have a chance. Well, Luke knew that he had to try to come out even out of 1 and 2 and blew it in there. And, Ty did what he had to do and pinched him down, and they climbed up and boom. But, it made me happy to see at least that, then he went to the Dells and he, picked up and won there. But I can't, as I told those guys, I can't be there, and you're not going to always have that success. And I said, you're on a different tire too. Like, I don't know, when people reach out to me this year, it's like, I don't know what to tell you guys. Like, I don't even want to tell you the wrong thing because I've never ran on this tire. Like, okay, yes, it might be somewhat similar, but like, if I'm going to give you good advice, like, I want to know what the hell I'm talking about. I just don't want to tell you something. And it's like, I'm getting further and further out of touch. I remember a long time ago, Mark told me a story that your grandpa said, all the years that he was involved in racing, and, Mark had talked to him about, just his continued involvement. He told Mark, the way that the sport is evolving, if I don't stay on top of it and I get out of it for a couple of years, I'd be lost. I'd be lost if I got back into it. And I do think there's some truth to that. I definitely think there's some truth to that. So like, I know if my kids ever get into it or whatever, there's probably going to be a learning curve, again for me, because it changes so fast. But it was a cool perspective from somebody that had been in the sport for, 50 years, that, your grandpa was obviously that intelligent that he knew that if he got out of it, you better be done, because it's going to be that much harder getting back into it.
Oh yeah. And he comes from a time you think about, probably, things evolve now in our days, but you really think about, if you look at racing, start in 1960 and then you look at cars in 65, 70, 75. I mean, there's some large jumps there. So yes. I'm sure that's what he had in mind and was, and he was certainly right about it.
And they didn't have, there's internet, right? There's a lot of resources that people can access, on the internet. And, I question like artificial intelligence. What could that bring to racing?
I never even thought about that.
Just how intelligent some of this stuff has gotten. But, you're right. They had it different. Just the things how they had to innovate, with bodies and chassis and, they had it probably a little bit right for the most part. I know Toby does some of his stuff, and stuff, but majority, you guys, did a lot of your own chassis stuff. But not, that's less common, I think, than it was back in the day. Back in the day, I think that's what people did, right? You had to cut apart this and change this and do that because it was more stock stuff. Like you couldn't open the left-hander catalog that's 300 pages long and, okay, what do I want to buy today? Or, go to PRI. Okay, what is the latest, greatest trick thing that I can buy today? They didn't have that. They had to create that.
Yeah. They were the ones creating it. Yeah, exactly. Man, what a time to be alive then. Yeah. So what's it like to see, Luke, someone that you helped so much be able to be at that stage, the amount he is now,
I think, proud for sure. Like I said, I, looked at all the drivers that I helped, brothers, sister, even Natalie, to see her get to the next level and, whether she won a race or not, just to see, I think how many people have been able to help two drivers get to the next level in a NASCAR.
Yeah, you were a part of their story,
that's it makes me proud, to see that. And it's, when I watched Luke yesterday, in the truck race, to see him, same story, different verse, to go to a racetrack that he's never been to, super speedway style, never been on it, and to put himself in position, there's luck involved, but you still have to get up there. That doesn't happen by luck. You have to put yourself in the right position to push, Grant Enfinger to the lead, and then for him to get pushed to the lead, and to be racing with
It's not like you grew up bump drafting at State Park Speedway.
Exactly. So, just to, obviously I lived that with him and I saw that with him, and that's not a shock to me, right? But it still makes you proud of what he's been able to do. Like I've seen him do this at every racetrack. I've seen us go through the gate at, Madison and never see the racetrack in his life and go out there and be the top of the charts. I saw Kaukauna. Everybody's like, oh, we went there for a Tundra race. Everybody's like, oh, wait till you go to Kaukauna. He was like third on the board in his first Tundra race there. It's like, like I said, I don't know how a driver can adapt. I've never been a driver myself. But so it doesn't surprise me to see him get in a totally different car, totally different setup, weight, everything, and go on a completely different platform and have success. That doesn't surprise me. I've seen that in him since at 13 years old when I've told his dad, I think your son needs to go super late racing. So now I know what to expect with him. You know what I mean? And I don't, and after the race, we were texting back and forth and, he was picking apart everything he did wrong. And, I didn't even tell him this, but, I was thinking what I did worked because when I was hard on him, when we finished second or whatever, I knew where he wanted to go. Right. And when we finished second, and I was hard on him or even hard on myself, like that, those text messages showed me that he learned the lesson that I was trying to teach him, right? Don't ever be happy with wherever. Like, I'm not saying drive yourself nuts over it, but always want more. And especially when you get to that level.
Critique yourself and, want to improve.
You're not, at this point, you're not trying to be the local hero at Golden Sand Speedway, right? You are obviously trying to make a career in NASCAR. You better be a critic of yourself.
Yep.
You better pick apart. Why? Because the guys that are successful, right? Those are the guys that are doing the work. They're going in the sim. They're doing whatever it takes to try to further themselves. They're not going to make excuses, because at the end of the day, ThorSport could care less about your excuse. The next team that you might have an opportunity with, they're going to care less about the excuse that you're going to make. They want success. It doesn't matter how you get there, but they're not going to want to hear, oh yeah, this happened or that happened. No, that's not going to be acceptable at that point. And that was always my lesson to, like I said, not necessarily Mark or Jerry, but, like Natalie. And, once they got to a point where they started talking about, maybe I can get here, like this is not going to be, you're not going to have Tom the spotter, helping you walk through these scenarios. Like, you're going to have to figure it out. They're going to expect you to know that, so now is the time. Like, yeah, I'm going to be a pain in your butt, but there's going to be some point in your career you're going to look back and you're going to say, God, I'm so thankful. That's what I hope, at least, that they look back and they say, here are all the things that Tom was able to teach me, and it helped me get to where I was,
Yeah. No, it's gotta be awesome from your standpoint to watch that. It'd be certainly cool to have somebody be able to help them achieve their dreams, not just help them be successful, but help them achieve their dreams.
Yep.
So, we talked about racing just in general, progressing, not to badmouth, short track racing or anything like that. But if you had a magic wand for a day and you could make any change to short track racing, whether it's just up north here or cross country wide, what would you change to make it better?
I think everybody's got answers to everything, right? But what I don't see is, just my professional career, being involved in operations management and financials, and we don't see the financial side of racetracks. I don't think there's a ton of racetracks out there that are, unless you have a premier event, that are getting rich, right? And I don't even want to say getting rich, but, Five Flag Speedway. You look at it, you look at the local races, there's, you can count 20 people in the stands. If they didn't have Snowball Derby, that racetrack would be in serious trouble. Or I don't know what the Bryants, if they have money, I have no idea. But, you'd have to have somebody that truly loves racing, that can fund a racetrack. I mean, you look at what we've had around here, Wimmers, DeBoer, at Marshfield, right? They have financial backing more than relying on the racetrack to make ends meet. Even the Smileys, they have jobs, right? They do things outside of.
It's just coming down to people that love racing.
Yes, and as far as what I would change, on the racer side of things, I don't even know what the wand looks like. I hate. It's
a tough question.
Yeah, I hate,
because I don't have much of an opinion myself.
I hate the cost. I understand the argument for payouts and versus the cost of racing. The cost of racing has gone up probably tenfold, and our payouts are relatively the same as what they were 20 years ago. But look at the stands. How do you pay more? So now these racetrack owners are in a situation where they're trying to raise the gate price. I don't know that that's the solution. I really don't. They're trying to squeeze a little bit more out of the food. They're trying, the quality of the food goes down because they're trying to make a higher profit on it. And that's what I mean. They see the books, right? We don't see the books. It's easy for us to sit here and say, oh, they should do this and they should do that. But what I do think they can do is we have to adapt with the times. I feel like race tracks, do a really poor job. There are some racetracks out there that are, for example, they have the 6-cylinder high school kids, bringing their cars.
Yes.
More of that. Like, we don't, my friends from high school, they aren't sitting at the racetrack. You know what I mean? I don't know how many you have, Cody, whatever. I mean, some people I'm sure, but in general, I think you go to the racetrack, you look, it's like, okay, what are we doing to address this problem? We all want more spectators, but let's face it, the 70, 80-year-olds are not going to be around forever. So what are we doing? Something that I thought was kind of cool it might have been the last race at State, or one of the last races at State Park that I went to. And they had a group of kids brought out 10 smart cars. And it was the quirkiest, dumbest thing. But why aren't we doing more of that? All the kids they brought that are 18, 19, 20 years old that they brought to watch these smart cars go beat and bang on each other. Like, that's what I mean about innovating. Like,
being creative.
Yes, we have taken the easy way, right? And so many people want to say, well, we used to do this. I don't care. Why are we looking back? That is not going to work. What are we doing to look forward? And like I said, there are some promoters that are, I feel like, doing a decent job, but there are also some promoters that, they make a Facebook post, which is free, and that's the extent of their promotion. That's not, like, you wonder why your racetrack is not being successful. Like, how much work did that take you? 3 seconds to type up something and post a picture? Like, what are you doing to engage the 20 to 30-year-old or 10 to, I don't care, bring your family. I don't care if it's a 40-year-old that has a 10-year-old kid. Like, what are you doing to entertain them? I can tell you what's not entertaining them is the old way of thinking of the long intermissions. Enough. Like, I told Wimmers this, and I'll be honest, I didn't agree with this. And I don't want to see 6 divisions. Like, why the hell are you drawing out a show to 3-4 hours and thinking that that's valuable? Like, just because you have quantity does not equal value. Like, I don't care if I go to the racetrack and it's an hour and a half long. If it's boom, 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 and smash some stuff up and maybe at intermission, but to me, you need to keep something going at all times. Like, don't do the traditional shutdown of intermission. I know you want to sell food, and like I said, I understand there's a financial aspect to that, but figure out something creative. Maybe you do like a baseball game where you strap a thing and you take the burgers around to people and sell burgers in the stands, or soda or beer or whatever in the stands, instead of relying on people coming up, and entertain them the whole time instead of just sitting there, and okay, we're going to take, a half-hour intermission that always seems to bleed over into a longer intermission. Then you throw the green flag on the 4-cylinder race and somebody blows up. And now you have those scenarios. You're going to have the perfect night of racing once in a blue moon where everything goes smooth, and we didn't sell as many cheeseburgers because we didn't have the downtime. But in general, you're going to have that 10, 15-minute cleanup, that big wreck that takes people can go get their hamburger, people can go get their cheeseburger during that time. But I just think, like, there's certain aspects that promoters have not kept up with, or not thought about, like, how do we engage the next generation of, we know how to treat the 70 or 80-year-old. We know what they're used to, but that does come with some pushback, right? It's no different than what you're seeing in NASCAR. What do you think NASCAR is trying to do? They're trying to do things to attract the younger. They're getting, rappers, even though, that's not going to be at the top of my music list, but they're trying to get,
you don't stay up to date in the rap game.
No, exactly. But that's what they're trying to do. They're trying to draw the next generation. So there is pushback, right? You're going to get the 70-year-old NASCAR fan that, you watch Kenny Wallace. He's hilarious, his podcast, and he always does the imitations. I'm done with NASCAR. That's what you get, the 50, 60, 70-year-old, and they're done with NASCAR because they're trying to do things a little bit different. But truth be told is, it's a business. they are trying to sustain their business. So any business where you work now, where I work now, if we say, this is how I'm going to do it in 20 years from now, we're doing it the exact same way. Number one, you're probably not in business.
Yeah, you won't get to 20 years.
Exactly. So, I mean, it's a hard, answer or question to answer. Like I said, from the racer perspective, I wish we could keep a cost under control. A bigger rule book, I'm torn. I don't know that that's the right solution. Our rule book has gotten bigger and bigger, and I get it why they're doing it, because they're trying to eliminate all this latest, greatest trick things. The one thing that I think should be done is zero testing. And I mean zero testing. I don't care what your problem is. I don't care if you blew your motor. I don't care. There is no testing. Now, the caveat to that should be, you're a new driver, you're whatever. The day of the race, you can come from 2 to 4 is open testing for, if you're a rookie in the class, for the first 2 or 3 races, there's open testing, for that. But I just think that only benefits the well-financed team. It's not going to close the gap. It's going to spread the gap, because the ties, I mean, even we didn't test that much. We could have, but even like our team, I mean, we had enough financing behind us. We could have went and tested more. That isn't helping Mark Mackesy, right? To go test, even when Mark tests, he's testing on old tires. He's not testing like we test. When we go test, there's a couple sets of brand new tires. You got, 4 sets of shocks in the trailer. But you're not, I don't know how you eliminate the cost,
Yeah. It's kind of the same thing as brought up. It's you can't slow down technology. And, as racers, I mean, we kind of look at ourselves as being smart and innovative, and, do you want to dumb us down? No, I don't think we want to dumb ourselves down. And I've heard that too about the no testing thing. So when you brought that up, I was going to ask, well, what about new drivers? And I kind of like that. Well, hey, you're a new driver, so for these first several races, you can come when no one else is doing it, and you get extra time. And I think it's a if a person went that route, it's a good answer to it. Because, I mean, people spend a lot of money in testing to learn new things and to figure things out. And someone's working a full-time job or going to school, and whether they have the money or not, it's tough to go and test. And if someone's out there testing all day, they're learning.
Yeah. It's like I said, there's not a right or wrong answer, but I mean, cost is the biggest driver, and I don't know how do you, now everybody's got the stuff, I mean, how do you go back to a standard shock or and there's classes for that, and I get the argument that, like, hey, this is super late racing, right? I get that, and what you're signing up for when you get into super late racing, but I think we all wanted to see it succeed. I think that's the hard part is, yes, I agree with you. It's super late racing. It's the top level as far as local, regionally, whatever. So I'm not saying we should mandate $100 shock, this or that, but I also don't want to see tracks dying off, because there's no cars and in turn no people. I don't think that's a good thing either. I think if somebody somehow, and I don't think this will ever happen, by the way, but I think somehow the only way that you can make it happen is completely shock the system, and you get every racetrack from Florida to Wisconsin on some kind of even platform. I mean, I'm not talking about needing to be perfect, because they've tried that a few years ago. It was somewhat, but even regionally, get everybody on the same platform, start and eliminate some of this high dollar stuff. Yes, I know it's sitting on your shelf, and I know it's going to be a boat anchor now, but it's going to have to shock the system. It's going to piss people off at first. People are going to say, I'm done. I'm not going to do this, right? Everybody does that, right? You get the emotional side of you. You get caught up in the moment, and you say, I'm never coming back and racing at this racetrack again. But if everybody does it, everybody, then maybe there's a chance to make some big changes, but tracks are trying, but it's sporadic. It's State Park, Dalles, and this track do this. Slinger does this. Kaukauna does this. And like, we're not on the same page. And, so why the hell am I going to go, I'm going to say, okay, you have to, your shock, you can't have a shock over whatever, $400, $500. But then the next track is going to let you do it. And then now that local track is in a predicament. Well, now somebody calls and says, well, screw it. I'm not going to come race at your racetrack. I'm going to go run at Slinger because they're allowing this. That's the problem if you don't have everybody in, Slinger, Kaukauna, Norway, Wassa, not Golden Sands, Elko. I don't care. La Crosse, but there's so many differences between those racetracks. I just don't think it'll ever happen, but I think that's the only way. But I don't totally think it's doom and gloom. Is short track racing dead? No. There's racetracks that are thriving. You look at, Marshfield, Golden Sands, they were down, right? 5 years ago, they were down. I mean, there was a few years ago at Golden Sands, I thought, man, I can hear the time trials on WDEZ and, I'm thinking the heyday of, you go there and there'd be 40 super stocks and 35 super late models. Yeah. And, what happened? But they put a lot of effort in there, and look at what has come out of it. Now they're pushing 20 super lates and, they're starting to turn things around, but I'm sure it's a lot of work on their part. But I'm glad to see even Marshfield, their car counts have gone back up again. Wassa, I have to believe with Wassa closing down, I mean, not everybody's going to quit, right? There might be some that say, the hell with it. But I think in general, I think people are going to go race someplace else. So I would think that would help, Plover and Marshfield. But it'll be interesting.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think you cover a lot of good things. I know the one thing that I'll definitely second you on is 6 divisions racing in a night. And like I said, I don't understand the financials of how a racetrack works. So, this is me being very, inexperienced in that realm and naive, but, so I know you got to get, people in the gate and, having more drivers brings more fans, that's, my understanding of it and, it would be my thought on it. But when I first got into Tundra Series, and I think it was for like a year or two, maybe 3, it would always be the super late models, and there would be two other divisions. I had so many people tell me, man, Colin, when are you running another Tundra race? Because I love coming and watching those because you guys do your longer race. There's only 2 other divisions. Me and my kids are out of there in a couple hours. And people love that. So yeah, that's definitely one thing that I've always thought about too for the last several years. And and I like asking that question. I'm probably going to keep asking it to certain guests on here because maybe just give more talk on it, different people's opinions kind of out there and some thought behind it. And I think it's tough to slow down technology. And even when things have been tough for me in racing, I only go racing 10, 12 times a year in a super late model. I've never really, I guess, maybe complained about the technology. I think the thing that I'd like to, a lot of things just have to happen kind of all at one time, and which isn't always feasible to make it happen. But it's just, really, for racetracks to be the place where businesses want to advertise, having racing be the thing that people are talking about, so that, businesses want to sponsor race cars. I think kind of like it used to be, and like you said, and I think it takes getting that engagement of people 20 to 30 years old. Hey, this is where people are hanging out. They're hanging out at the racetrack on Fridays and Saturday nights. Well, we're going to advertise. Well, I'm going to either advertise on a race car. I'm going to advertise on a billboard. Maybe I'm going to sponsor a night at the racetrack. And it brings more, when tracks get more money and they pay more money, then it makes the money you're spending as a racer worth it, because when you're rolling the thing out of the trailer, you feel like you're not an idiot for spending what you're spending to be there and racing for what you're racing for. So that's kind of some of the things that I think about is just, I want to see racetracks be to that thing where racetracks are where businesses want to spend their money for advertising and promoting, and race cars, the same thing. And I don't know if that's the answer. It's probably not all the answer, but it's something.
Well, and you think about like a 4-cylinder class, the payout is less. So of course, if I'm a racetrack owner, business wise, I want lower support classes, and because I'm not paying them out as much, and they're still probably bringing, most of them are still probably bringing, maybe not quite as many crew members, but they're still bringing 3-4 crew members in the pits.
Right.
So now I'm paying that guy $100 to win, and they spent, $200 to get through the gate and whatever, versus, I'm paying $1,000 to win or whatever, and that guy's bringing, $250 through the gate. So I mean, I gotta believe that simple math. But I don't think, I thought when I look back, I know Baziners, people liked them or they didn't like them, but I thought Craig was a good promoter.
They did a lot of fun. Growing up, there was a lot of fun stuff that happened at Golden Sands.
And kids, there was a big emphasis on kids, I
still hear people talking about, oh man, I remember being a kid doing the big wheel races. I still hear people talking about that.
So Craig was I thought he was kind of an innovator there, where they were always doing new promotions. I remember Al Baziner, we were talking to him one time, and he said, some of these support classes that they're going to phase themselves out, every 8 to 10 years, and they did. But they were cognizant of that, and they, okay, so then they started a cruiser class, right? They were the ones that really started that cruiser class. Then they did bus racing. But it all phased out, right? Eventually, the cruiser class went away. But they were always on the front end of innovating, and they had people around this is a hotbed, for, I think in general, for some racers. And so they always had something else to attract people. And at the end of the day, the average fan, I want to watch super lates. But if you can bring people there and they can say, hey, these 2-man cruisers smashed into each other, they did this, or they finished side by side, right? You got to have something to sell. You want the entertainment. It's an entertainment business. People want to see entertainment. I don't even care if it's a super late race. I don't want to watch some single file boring race. That's not going to excite me to come back if I'm an average race fan either. So, I think there's stuff that, like, look at these EVA destructions. Sometimes it makes me sad that they're so successful, because it's like, don't these people like racing? Like, but there's your sign, right? It doesn't matter what I like. Do something at intermission. Do some thrill at intermission, your intermission, that there's still something going on, that it's some stupid gimmick thing that people are talking about. The bus races. How many bus races? Every time Golden Sands had bus races, that place was packed.
Oh, yeah.
And they flipped one over, and the crowd went nuts, right? Half of those, probably more than half the people, could have cared less about what went on during the races, or when people have fireworks, right? People have fireworks. People come out in droves to watch fireworks. So like the consumer is telling you what they want. You have to listen, and it doesn't matter if you don't agree with it. They are the ones that are paying to go through that gate. So I don't know, do racetracks get feedback from the consumer? Like what value do you feel like, I feel like most people don't want true and honest feedback, like not on Facebook, because it just gets nasty on there, but like a private, like maybe getting feedback from, hey, you fill out this feedback form, you get a, free popcorn or something like that. I don't know, some gimmick.
Yeah, instead of saying what pissed you off the last time you were there, what do you want to see?
Yeah.
What do you want to see?
Yep. Like, I don't know, maybe some racetracks do that, but I think in my professional career, right, I do that all the time. Like, what can I do better? I want to do better. And I think people respond well to that. The people that report to me, they like that, right? Because they know I'm there for them. I'm there to try to help them out, to make their jobs easier, so what value are you bringing to the person that's walking through and paying $15 a head or $10 for a, 12-year-old kid? Like, you want them to leave at the end of the night and say, yeah, I spent $100, but it's the best $100 I spent this week. How do you get people to feel like that?
Yeah, I agree. And, I think about ticket prices, and I thought, can they really charge that much? But you go to the movies and you're there to watch an hour and a half, 2-hour movie, and that's not cheap.
No.
And going to watch racing is a lot better than that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
If there's anything that you wish people knew about Tom Ress that maybe they didn't, what would it be?
I think in general, I think I live a pretty low-key lifestyle. I probably live on Facebook more with my kids now than I had in the past. But I think there's a lot of people that know me, people that have worked with me, not even on the racing side, but just professionally on the racing side. I think that people would say that I've been genuine about the impact that I've tried to make on their lives. And, my racing has probably been the biggest help to my career out of anything. I think, we talked about earlier, soccer, baseball, whatever your kid's in. I think there's something to be said about having your kids involved in some form of competitive sport. I don't care if it's playing the trombone in a event, where you're in a competition, but there's a very valuable lesson to be taught there. And, I think, I did a lot of things at a very young age, crew chiefing by the time I was 18 years old. In my professional career, I was an operations manager at, 24, 25 years old, I've had a lot of success throughout my career. And I think a lot of that is attributed to racing because it taught me the value of a team, and, my teams, when I talk about genuine, the teams that I've had, going back to Mark, it was the same guys, Natalie, you had the same, Travis, Nathan, the same guys that helped out, then I went to Luke. It's the same guys that are helping out the entire time. And I think, I tend to be a very loyal person, from the racing aspect, whether it was Carl Wagner, when Mark couldn't afford to go to Carl, at the time, but once I got hooked up with Deckers, we went to Carl. I was loyal to Wagner. In general, we really didn't have any problems. But when you're loyal to people. Brandon Ernest did our shocks for a number of years. I was loyal to him, and I think I don't see that as much, right? Everybody wants to go for the flavor of the day. Mm-hmm. So-and-so has got this. FRS is doing tie shocks, right? So I'm going to go get FRS.
Yeah, you see a lot of those stickers.
Yeah,
now.
Exactly. So it's just, people do that. But if I put myself in their shoes, right? People know, if I'm a shock builder, kind of what people, especially if you have somewhat of a name, who's with who. I don't care what they say. Are you going to give them your latest, best, greatest thing when you know that more than likely by the end of the year, they're going to be jumping ship and they're going to go get their shock? No, you're not going to do that. Why would you do that?
Right.
You're not going to give up all your hard work to somebody. But I think that's been another part of the success is the people that, have stuck with me, 5-star, it doesn't matter, Bassett, people that I have worked with that have helped me out, I always went to them, I remember Al I got a $50 certificate for Aero wheels. It's like, Brian Gill has been great to me. At Bassett, like, you're going to wreck this over a $50 gift certificate. Like, I'm not saying wreck it. Like, I'm not like, but like, I just feel like there's something to be said about you build relationships with people, you stick with them through the hard times, and they stick with you through the hard times. And I think that is true in all aspects of, of where I've been. I mean, Brandon Ernest has some of the biggest clients in short track racing, right, that are getting shocks from him. The number of nice things that he has said about me to people in private, he doesn't have to do that. There's no reason for him to do that. But I have to believe that part of it is because I've been loyal to him. You know what I mean? And when you lost races, I wasn't the first guy on the phone, complaining about the shocks or whatever. No, I knew it was probably my setup, and I knew that he was giving me a good shock package. So I just eliminated that out of there. And I think that's, advice and, for people up and coming is try to find a group and be loyal to them, stick with them. Long term, that I feel like that's going to help you out, because they're going to want to help you get to the next level. They're going to want to help you be successful. If you're jumping around and playing hopscotch, there's going to be, why would they be loyal to you? But I genuinely believe that, Wagner Automotive wanted us to be successful, that Brandon Ernest wanted us to be successful, that, Brian Gill wanted us to be successful. I mean, everybody, all the people that have helped me out, because I don't care how good you are nobody without a good team, without good sponsors, it doesn't matter, right? I mean, you can think you're the greatest thing that ever walked on the earth. You aren't. You know what I mean? You need to have good people. And, that's the biggest lesson I learned is you better build strong teams, and I don't care if it's, your tire guy, you raced for Gary and Elaine, they came on board with Luke, the greatest help, great people, I missed when Elaine wasn't there, because then our notes went to hell, because she always was the one that, had everything organized in a row. But, you couldn't Gary, I don't know if he wanted to, but I kind of roped him into helping with tires, and Gary became a very good tire guy. He didn't do, but that was one less thing that I had to worry about. Right. And I think that was a reason why Luke's program became even more successful, because I wasn't trying to crew chief. I wasn't trying to spot, and I wasn't trying to do tires. Like, I could say, okay, Gary, go, this is what I want for split. And Gary could go get it, and that was one variable that you could take out of it. So, it's, hopefully people have a better idea, of my story. Like I said, it's a little less traditional than the average, hey, my dad raced, or my dad was, a crew chief, or worked on cars or whatever, right? I didn't have that. It kind of was disconnected. Kind of another cool fact is my parents live on the end of a T road. If you go straight through there, that's where Bemco was. So they were right next to Bemco. Before my time, the shop has been torn down. The slab and surface plate still remain. But the guy that they worked out of, I mowed their lawn and stuff like that. So when it was still a shop, he still worked in it. But at that point, by the time I was old enough, race cars were long gone out of there. But so a little cool history of
that's cool.
Where I grew up.
I threw a Bemp coil on one of my dug it out from the back of the shop one day, and had to throw it on my car one time. So that was kind of cool. Still rated well, probably 20 or 25 years later at the time, but the loyalty thing, I think, whether that's racing or whatever life, I think that's pretty awesome. And I think it's definitely true, being loyal to people and sticking with them through good and bad times, and just kind of always being there for each other is a huge and important thing. What's been the best thing you've liked about fatherhood so far, since you've kind of moved away from helping out with racing to doing that?
Yeah, I think I realized, I really picked on my mother and father-in-law because, they're both their kids, had good upbringing. So I picked on them a lot about, giving their kids everything. And I realized I'm quickly following in those footsteps. It's really hard not to want to give your kids, I don't want to say everything. It's not like we give them everything, but, a good life. But the fact, just watching them, your kids are a little bit older than mine, but it's amazing how even almost 2.5 years has gone by, just how fast time goes by.
I always say that's the one thing no one ever lied to me in my life about is how quickly kids grow up.
Yes.
And you have the second one and you're like, wow, you're 1 year old. And it's like, oh crap, that second one's getting older too. It's
Exactly.
like, oh, God, what happened?
Yeah. But that's, just seeing them grow up, get their own personalities, and it really, I guess, I went from like, you have things in your life that drive you to want to be successful. Racing was that for a long time for me. Now I want to get up, I want to go to work, I want to be successful at work for my kids so that I can provide my kids with good opportunities. And, you look at, there's definitely something to be said. You look at families that, you call it generational wealth, but, families that are put themselves in good situations and they come from families where their parents were hard workers. And whether we realize it or not, we are going to have a huge impact on our kids, greater than we can picture right now, right? We're going to be the grandma and grandpa at some point, and we're going to look back and be hopefully proud of, who they are as a 30-year-old, and know that just like I know that I had a lot of help in getting Luke to where he is, and Natalie and whoever else, I want to have that same feeling with my kids, right? I want to look when I'm 60 or 70 years old and see them being wildly successful. That'll make me more proud than, I guess, anything in the world,
Yeah, absolutely. It's, you talk about spoiling kids. And like I said, I'm an only child, and, with racing and stuff, I spend a lot of money on myself. And I remember when we had our daughter, I was like, man, like, am I going to want to, spend a lot of money on certain things with her? And I remember, kind of going online one day and like, oh, there's one of those, Strider bikes when, on the rocking base, it's $300. Buy that. I'm like, oh, that's where it all starts.
Exactly.
No hesitation whatsoever. Like, oh, she needs that. I gotta have her on that bike as soon as I can. And
I'm there. I got Ashton Grandpa bought him a kitty cat and a 120. And
I saw that.
I have two a Jeep Power Wheels and a Challenger Power Wheels, and so he has. I bought him a 4-wheeler. Last year. So I'm like, oh God, what am I getting myself into here? I feel like I'm setting myself up to fail.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that. I saw the little one sitting on the kitty cat. What was Dad's thoughts on that?
Oh, I don't, if he wants to race, whatever, like I said, but I don't want. I really don't. That is so dangerous.
So wildly dangerous.
And you can get hurt.
Jerry got banged up pretty
bad.
good. I remember that.
Yes.
Yeah.
And man, I mean, you crash, there's I don't care if you have a Hans device on or not. There's nothing protecting you. There's, rock hard hay bales. I don't care if they pull them out of a heated shed at the start of the weekend. They're as hard as a rock, and putts around the yard, I don't care, but is he going to get the itch? And I'm sure his Uncle Jerry is going to be pushing him.
Be a good influence.
Good influence. Yeah. So, but it's fun. The one thing I will say about racing that I don't know that you get in any other level of sports is the family aspect of it. You think about your family, like you're probably as close with your family as you are because of racing. I'm certainly close with my mom and dad. We have but I didn't live at the racetrack every weekend with them. I didn't live in the shop every night of the week with them. Like, I think there's something that's really strong, that bond that you build, like, okay, they play football, great, but it's not the same bond as what racing does. I think that's a very, I'm trying to think right now, like off the top of my head, I can't think of another sport that builds that kind of bond with your family.
Yeah, I agree. And I think, you end up spending a lot of time with your family doing those things. And, there's obviously some of the bickering, but I think in my mind, and me being engulfed in racing versus any other sport my entire life, and I think when you have, it's not just time that's invested, it's, it's the money and, all of the late nights and all of that time and all of the time you spend trying to make it better. It just elevates that to a whole nother level. And it's like, you watch, the thing you think together that you build and create and spend money on, and then something happens to it, and then how quickly you rebuild it and put it back together and get back to it. And yeah, it's definitely, it's a whole nother level versus
sometimes bad. I mean, you had a couple rough starts to the year. Not last year.
That was like 2021 and 2023. Yeah,
that takes the wind out of your sails.
It does. I left the racetrack 2 different times, thinking like, yeah, I'm done with my own car for sure. But and because of a lot of great people, it got put back together. And and the one time it happened, my son was just born right after that had happened, and I didn't want to focus at all on rebuilding the thing. And I spent a lot of family time, and my uncle and dad, without me, spent a ton of time putting that thing back together so I could be there for my family and whatnot. And it's and that's a lot of love it takes people to do that. So it's I appreciate it and love it a lot. Yeah. Well, anything else? Do you have anything else before we sign off?
No, appreciate you having me. It's been fun.
No, this has been a blast, and I appreciate you taking the time to do this, and we'll let you get back to hanging out with the family for the rest of the weekend.
All right, sounds good.
All right, thanks, Tommy.
Yep.